Part 50. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 503. In Juzhu, second-grade elixirs can be said to be very common, and for alchemists, the refining method of Xiaohuandan is even simpler. Even in Yuzhou, even some who have just started to practice it have less than a year or two. All alchemists can make it. And the fact that such a second-grade elixir appeared in the quiet room of the dignified medicine emperor was already very strange. If the elixir on the table was a fifth-grade elixir or above, the princess would not be so curious. And the facts have proved that this is indeed not an ordinary second-grade Xiaohuandan. This Xiaohuandan contains the aura of heaven. Sensing the spiritual energy contained in the Xiaohuandan, Yunzhou's princess expression changed at this moment. This Xiaohuandan contains the spiritual energy of heaven. Where did you get it? When she said this, her eyes were fixed on Luo Tan, her hands were subconsciously supporting the table, her eyebrows were as dark as black, her rosy mouth was slightly open, and her bright and beautiful eyes that seemed to be naturally attractive were full of surprise. Luo Tan was much calmer than expected. She took a sip of tea, glanced at the woman with a proud figure in a wide-sleeved skirt, and said, "Before, the road to becoming an immortal was descended in the Lianji section. You should know about this." Bar. The princess hummed softly and frowned, but that time was not the real road to becoming an immortal. Emperor Daipen once tried to take advantage of that opportunity to ascend to heaven, but failed. "Have you ever set foot in heaven?" the princess asked again, her tone still gentle, her breasts full and straight, and her skin white and tender. The most eye-catching thing is the mature charm exuding from her body, like a ripe peach that can be squeezed out of water. Luo Tan shook his head slowly. "If I set foot in heaven, you would not be able to see me in Kyushu now." The princess was silent. This is true. If becoming a human and ascending to heaven is the dream of Hideo Almighty, then embarking on the road to becoming an immortal and ascending to heaven is another wish of Hideo Almighty. The former can free himself from the shackles of heaven and earth, and his lifespan will be endless from now on. And the latter, as long as they set foot in heaven, they will also have infinite longevity, because the aura of heaven is different from that of Kyushu. It is said that the aura of heaven is extremely rich. If it is said that ordinary chi training monks need 3 to 5 years to refine their gods in Kyushu, then in heaven, it may only take half a year. Moreover, the existence of heaven itself is not bound by the rules of heaven and earth. It can be said to be a paradise. She stared into Luo Tan's eyes with her gentle eyes, took a deep breath, and said, "Then where did you find this elixir?" Ordinarily powerful people may not recognize where this elixir comes from even if they see it. But the princess was different. She had tried to break through the road to immortality in the past. Although she failed, at that time, she had vaguely seen a person at the end of the road to immortality. The aura of heaven was also felt at that time. Luo Tan had a gentle smile on her face. She looked like she had everything under control, but in fact, she felt a little worried. Even the medicine king of Yuzhou did not expect that the princess would be aware of the existence of the heavenly court in this way. Should we tell her the truth now? As someone who once saved her life and was a sister to her, there was no harm in telling her the truth, but the matter in heaven was Musion's secret after all. The other party was still hiding under her table at this moment. If she hadn't been through his agreeing and telling the princess rashly was not a good idea after all. Just as Luo Tan was thinking of this, her delicate body suddenly trembled slightly, and she almost covered her mouth to avoid making an embarrassing sound. Then, her expression quickly returned to calm, and she smiled and said, "Have you ever heard of the name of the ancestor of the Ye clan?" Ye Qingxin, the princess has naturally heard of this person. It would be better to say that she had met the ancestors of the Ye clan several times in the past. Some time ago, the road to immortality came down, and the ancestors of the Ye clan took this opportunity to come to Kyushu in a clone. At that time, she had many pills from heaven, all of which were refined by her hands. The graceful and elegant empress tapped the table with her fingertips and continued, a few days before the Qing emperor ascended to heaven, Ye Qingxin came to Yuzhou to look for me. The princess frowned in thought and said, she came to see you on the days when the Qing emperor emerged and ascended? What is her relationship with the Qing emperor? Ye Qingxin hopes that I will not interfere with Qing emperor's ascension, Luo Tan said. When did Ye Qingxin have a relationship with King Di again? At this moment, the beautiful lady who was as elegant and gentle as a lilac couldn't help showing a confused look on her face, and countless question marks seemed to pop up on her head. Is it because of Ye Qingxin that you haven't taken action against King Di before? But Ye Qingxin ascended to heaven a long time ago. When did she get involved with King Di again? The princess's thoughts suddenly stopped. Looking at the beautiful empress with a bit of fun in her eyes, she thought of a person in her mind for no reason. She hesitated and said, Musian? Ye Qingxin came forward for Musian. Of. She offered the heavenly elixir in exchange for your not interfering when the Qing emperor emerged and ascended. At this moment, the princess finally understood everything. No wonder there was some commotion in all the 9 states at that time, but you were the only one who remained calm. It turns out it was because Ye Qingxin brought you the elixir from heaven. The princess's eyes gradually brightened, and she asked, so the secret of ascension and ascension that you mentioned before is also related to this? Luo Tan said with a subtle expression, that's right. However, although this small returning pill contains the spiritual energy of heaven, it should not be enough for you to become immortal and ascend. Are you sure? The princess asked gently. Although her mood was a bit complicated, she was sincerely worried about it. Luo Tan was happy to have found a way to become immortal. It's still a bit certain. When Luo Tan said this, her beautiful legs under the table subconsciously rubbed lightly. This table is not big. In order to prevent the princess from accidentally touching Musian after sitting down, she had previously asked Musian to squat at her feet. Just now, in order to avoid being noticed by the princess, Musian did not send a message, but wrote the name Ye Qingxin on Luo Tan's leg with his finger. Thinking about it now, it was because the distance was too close. At this moment, she could even vaguely feel the boy's breath. The princess obviously did not expect that her best friend was not only talking to her at the moment, but also had to deal with Musian. She picked up the chopsticks on the table, took a sip of the medicinal meal, and said with a smile, if I knew that you would also ascend, I'm afraid those people I can't even sit still anymore. Luo Tan gently pressed the hem of her skirt with her slender hands, tilted her head, and smiled, if you knew that I would also attack the Ascension realm, maybe Yunzhou would also become Yuzhou's enemy in the future. She had just bathed and changed clothes, and her body exuded an alluring fragrance. Her delicate hair was decorated with a hosta and a golden tassel, and the golden tassel swayed gently in the quiet room, adding a bit of nobility to her stunning appearance. The princess was silent for a moment, then said calmly, Yunzhou will never be your enemy. Although Emperor Daipen has a high status in Yunzhou, it is not enough to make the entire Yunzhou obey his orders. The meaning of these words was already obvious. No matter what, she was on Luo Tan's side. This kind of deep sisterly love is touching enough. After all, in Kyushu, there are often many examples of brothers killing each other for a pill. And after the princess saw this little returning pill, and even learned that Luo Tan had the opportunity to become an immortal and ascend, instead of being jealous at all, she stood firmly on her side. This alone is already a rare thing. Luo Tan looked at the princess silently. At this moment, even the empress' usually calm state of mind could not help but have some fluctuations. Musian, who was under the table, was also a little surprised. The princess seemed to be really thinking about Luo Tan, so she wanted him to leave Luo Tan today. After all, from the princess's point of view, having an intimate relationship with Musian would do no good at all. I never expected that on this path of cultivation, I would see such a person who always considers others. Musian, who was squatting under the table and leaning against Luo Tan's thigh, also sighed secretly. From his perspective, he could not see anything, he could only see the princess opposite her with her legs together and her dark, wrinkled undershirt. The skirt was swaying slightly, and the fair skin and even faint blue veins of her feet could be vaguely seen. Although he couldn't see anything, it was not difficult for him to imagine that the princess' face at this moment must have a gentle expression when she looked at her best friend. "Can you lend me this elixir for a few days?" the princess suddenly asked. Luo Tan was quiet for a while, and then, her fingers seemed to be smoothing the wrinkles of the luxurious white dress casually, but in fact, she took this opportunity to gently touch Musian's face, as if to consult him. "Opinions." Musian wrote a word on her hand. "If you like it, I will give you this small pill of return." Luo Tan's elegant and calm voice came in the quiet room. "Ye Kingzin refined many pills containing the spiritual energy of heaven before going down to the lower realm, not just this one." This time, the princess did not refuse any more, and readily accepted Luo Tan's kindness. "Then I'll thank you in advance." After she finished speaking, she put down her teacup and said, "I haven't been in Yunzhou these days, so I don't know what Emperor Daipen wants to do. I will order someone to investigate secretly later, so I won't disturb you for now." She paused, glanced under the table with her beautiful eyes, raised the corner of her mouth, and looked at Luo Tan with a playful smile, "So as not to spoil your mood." After the princess left the quiet room, she walked all the way back to the guest room where she lived along the corridor. She sat down in front of the soft body with a graceful manner, gently rubbed her eyebrows, looked at the jade bottle in her hand, and fell into deep thought. "Princess, what are you thinking about?" At this time, a tentative inquiry came from the maid who was accompanying me on this trip. The princess' thoughts returned to reality and she shook her head gently. "It's nothing, it's just that what happened in the past 2 days is beyond my previous knowledge." The maid hesitated for a moment. "Are you talking about the matter between His Majesty the Medicine Emperor and Mr. Mu?" The princess nodded silently. She still couldn't figure out why Luo Tan didn't like anyone, but he fell in love with King Di's Taoist companion, the young monk who had just returned to the virtual realm. And why is Ye Kingzin, a powerful person who came to heaven, also involved with Musian? It stands to reason that Ye Kingzin has been in heaven in the past and should not know Musian, but in the end she was willing to come to see the Medicine Emperor in person for him, and even gave the Medicine Emperor the elixir in heaven. The princess took out the jade bottle containing the Xiao Huan Dan, thought for a moment, and said, "There seems to be some big commotion at Emperor Daipen's place recently. Please wait and send someone to keep an eye on it secretly. If anything happens, report it to me as soon as possible." The maid bowed slightly in response, then turned around and planned to leave. Etc. The princess suddenly called to the maid, "You have practiced alchemy with Luo Tan for a period of time in the past. Do you know this elixir?" The maid took the elixir and said hesitantly, "As for the princess, this is a small return elixir." As soon as she finished speaking, she suddenly seemed to notice something. She lowered her head slightly, sniffed, and said incredulously, "The spiritual energy in this elixir is too rich, it's a pity that the refining method of this elixir is too rough, a little, what a waste of such rich spiritual energy." The princess hummed softly, rubbed her eyebrows, and waved her hand gently, hoping to ask the maid to retreat. At this time, the thoughts in her mind suddenly stopped. As if she remembered something, she subconsciously raised her head and called the maid, "What did you just say?" The maid was startled. "My slave said that the spiritual energy in this elixir is too strong." Next sentence the princess interrupted. "The refining method of this elixir is too rough, and the hardness of the elixir is deliberately strengthened. I personally think that this refining method wastes the rich spiritual energy in this elixir. It does not look like a qualified person made by an alchemist." The princess's beautiful eyes slowly opened wide, her plump breasts rose and fell slightly, her heart trembled slightly, and she stood up suddenly. Her beautiful and sexy face showed the surprise of discovering some truth. That's right, that's it. Who is Ye Kingzin? The ancestor of the Ye clan, the only one in the Hedeo realm of the Ye clan, and proficient in alchemy. Although he is not as accomplished as Luotan, he is at least a 7th level alchemist. Would a 7th grade alchemist be a layman? How could he refine such a crude 2nd grade elixir? The answer is already obvious. This elixir was not refined by Ye Kingzin. Your Highness the Princess. The maid called tentatively. It's okay, please step back and go arrange what I just said. Only then did the princess realize her gaffe, and her tone returned to its former gentleness. After the maid left, the princess was silent for a long time, looking out the window with a complicated expression, thinking of the conversation she had just had with Luotan, and the figure of Musian. The crudely crafted elixir contains the aura of heaven. For some reason, she had a ridiculous guess in her mind. After the princess left the quiet room, Luotan pulled Musian out from under the table. Seeing that the young man's face seemed to be red from the heat, he couldn't help but feel guilty and said, "I'm sorry. It doesn't matter to me, but she probably noticed that I was under the table when she first arrived, right?" Musian said helplessly. "Maybe. The princess has been in the Dao for longer than me, and she was born to be connected to the Dao. Her perception is amazing." Luotan smiled and glanced at the young man, "But you still have to show off." Musian nodded, "I understand." The princess had some minor friction with him, but he turned around and continued to be intimate with Luotan, even if it was a little pretentious. As long as the Dapen Emperor's fiancée had a higher emotional intelligence, she would not have just revealed that they were in the quiet room. About making out. The 3 people in the room all understood, but they just didn't say anything. "But after this time, I'm afraid she will doubt your identity," Luotan sighed softly. Musian shrugged, "Since you can trust her, I also believe that she will keep this secret even if she knows about the Tiansheng furnace." Luotan's eyes flickered with a faint look, and he said, "I do believe her, but I don't want to be discovered by her so soon." Musian asked doubtfully, "Why?" Luotan was silent for a long time, then walked over in snow-white knee-high boots, stopped in front of Musian, and said softly, "Qing Emperor is not here, and there is no woman you know in Yuzhou, so you are mine. Man. I don't want to share it with others anymore, although I don't think that with the arrogance of the princess, she will take the initiative to show her kindness after learning that the spiritual energy of heaven comes from your cauldron, but I don't want to bet on even the slightest possibility. Although the ancients often said that love grows over time. But before they even started to get close, the Empress was already so possessive. Do you think I'm too stingy?" Seeing Musian's silence, Luotan suddenly asked. Musian noticed a trace of tenderness under the Empress' elegant appearance, shook his head, and said seriously, "Everyone is possessive, and I also like your Majesty's current possessiveness." Then, he saw 2 clusters of red clouds appearing on the face of the noble, elegant, and beautiful Empress of Yuzhou, and she glared at him. Musian couldn't help but smile. Compared to her usual aloof and elegant appearance, he still likes her now, because this kind of Luotan has more of a human spirit and will not make people feel distant. Musian reached out and held Luotan's delicate hand, and said softly, "Your Majesty, how about now?" Luotan gently stroked the young man's face, trying to calm his mind as much as possible. His voice was soft and elegant, "Not yet. There are a lot more memorials during the Sabbath. I have to deal with them later." "Damn Sabbath," Musian nodded, "then I won't disturb your Majesty for now." He turned around and was about to leave the quiet room, when the woman behind him suddenly stopped him. The moment Musian turned around, his collar was gently pulled by someone. Then when he looked up, he saw Luotan's beautiful and charming face. Luotan raised his head slightly, and the tips of their noses seemed to be touching at any time, and their ambiguous breaths gently blew on each other's faces. The next moment, Luo Tan's rosy and small sexy lips gently kissed Musian's lips, and then leaned close to his ear and whispered in a moist and sweet voice. "Wait for me in the bedroom tonight. Equals 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 dividing line equals 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 equals. Ask for monthly tickets and blades for the new week. By the way, does the image of the spirit dragon in your mind have horns on its head?" So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 504. Southern Wilderness. The wheels rattled. The luxurious phoenix chariot made of amethyst stopped at the space temple in southern wasteland. Not long after, the fairy with ethereal immortality and the most beautiful beauty in all 9 provinces held up her skirt and got out of the phoenix chariot with the support of the female disciples from Yaokai who were accompanying her. The strong wind caused her green dress to fly backwards, and the skirt was close to her tall and straight breasts. The thin dress could not hide her bulging figure. Every inch of skin on her body seemed to be shining with crystal light, and the white mist was hazy, making it difficult for people to see clearly. Yao Meng walked to the temple in an elegant manner, glanced at the Nanhuang maid at the entrance of the temple, and said in a soft voice, "Did the god of space ask you to come here to wait for me?" "Yes, the saint said that you will arrive today, so let me wait here and take you into the temple." The maid guarding the door answered respectfully, and then bowed slightly, "Please follow the younger one." Under the guidance of the maid, after a while, Yao Meng walked to the main hall on soft lichen and saw the woman who was already waiting in the hall. She has a graceful figure, sitting upright, and her long, silky platinum hair complements her gorgeous white dress, which unreservedly highlights the disdainful temperament that a queen should have. "Regina, or rather Shay. Yesterday, a phoenix chariot entered our southern wasteland from Dongzhou. Along the way, many southern wasteland monks were curious about the hostess of the phoenix chariot. Some even couldn't help but attack the phoenix chariot. But before he could touch the phoenix chariot, he was sealed in the furnace for several days." Shui walked down the stairs step by step and came to Yao Meng. She carelessly smoothed the pleats on her chest and said softly, "Obviously you can come to Nanhuang directly to find me, but you have to take a phoenix chariot and go slowly. Come on, sometimes you are really hard to understand." Yao Meng smiled, "Occasionally I want to see the scenery along the way, and it would be impolite to enter the southern wilderness temple rashly, right?" Shui smiled and asked calmly, "Why didn't you see Musian today?" "He is in Yuzhou." Yao Meng smiled. Shui's face changed slightly and her voice lowered subconsciously, "You left him alone in Yuzhou? Why?" "No reason, it's just that I need to go out and I don't feel comfortable leaving him in Dongzhou," Yao Meng said lightly. Shui's eyes flickered and she said softly, "You don't feel at ease if you stay in Dongzhou, but you feel relieved if you stay with the Emperor of Medicine? You know clearly that if the Emperor of Medicine notices his natural furnace." Shui did not continue because she saw something complicated flashing through Yao Meng's eyes for a moment. Then, Yao Meng raised his eyebrows slightly and said with a slight smile, "If it is not safe to stay with the Medicine King, then shouldn't we bring him to the southern wilderness? But I think the god of space has no interest in such a troublesome thing as taking care of people." "I'm not interested in taking care of people, but I'd still be very interested in taking care of your husband." Shui's usually gentle expression now showed a hint of weirdness, and she hummed softly, "That's natural, I naturally have no interest in your husband. However, Regina seems to have a special affection for Musian emotions, so I am thinking about her." Yao Meng hummed softly, and said with a half smile, "I see, the god of space is really considerate, and actually takes Regina's mood into consideration." There was a teasing tone in his words. Even if he deceived a silly girl like Ling Long, the dignified Qing emperor would not believe Shui's words. "I'm afraid that since the last time he tasted the natural furnace cauldron, the god of space has begun to taste the marrow and understand its taste." Shui slightly raised her snow-white chin, her platinum-smooth hair resting on Xiang's shoulders, and said in a soft voice, "Qing Emperor seems to have something to say." Yao Meng smiled lightly and talked about a seemingly irrelevant topic. "You must have heard of the body of the innate furnace, right? It's natural." "Why did you suddenly mention the natural furnace cauldron?" Shui asked softly with a sweet voice. The natural furnace cauldron is closely related to the realm of the person. The higher the realm, the greater the benefits that can be obtained after dual cultivation with it, but throughout the ages, most of the natural furnace cauldrons, even if they practice dual cultivation with it, the benefits they can actually obtain are limited. Even some low-level natural furnace cauldrons can only add a bit of emotion during dual cultivation. Yao Meng nonchalantly played with a strand of hair with her fingertips, her gentle eyes filled with compassion for all living beings. She raised her eyes and said softly, "But you should know what my husband's natural furnace is like, Bar." An unnatural look flashed across Shuiyi's face, and she smiled lightly and said, "I have never had any intimacy with your husband, so how could I know about these things?" Yao Meng did not get entangled in this matter, and wrote lightly, "When he was in the Qi training state, he had the furnace of the God refining state. After the God refining state, his natural furnace evolved to return to the void. And during the Immortal Ascension Conference, he took a pill, which allowed the Tiansheng furnace to complete its evolution again. The God of space might as well take a guess, what will his natural furnace be like when he reaches the realm of enlightenment?" Boom! Almost at that moment, Shuiyi opened her eyes suddenly, her heart beat faster, and she stared at the fairy in front of her with burning eyes. "Hideo, even a natural furnace that is higher than Hideo," she lowered her voice subconsciously and tried to stay calm as much as possible. Yao Meng smiled faintly and said, "Maybe, but there is a prerequisite for now, that is, he can successfully enlighten. You should know how dangerous the road from returning to enlightenment is, right?" Shuiyi nodded silently. "If in the return to the void realm one becomes a powerful person in Kyushu and becomes the target of attracting talents for those ancient aristocratic families, then in the enlightenment realm, one can do whatever they want in this world as long as one does not offend the great master of Hideo. However, the road to enlightenment is too difficult. Judging from past historical records, it is good to have 2 or 3 people who can achieve enlightenment among 1,000 return to the virtual realm. Since the rules of heaven and earth were rewritten not long ago, there are at least more than 1,000 people who have tried to achieve breakthroughs and enlightenment, and have finally fallen into the catastrophe. The road to becoming an immortal is long, and the way of heaven is ruthless. If you want to achieve enlightenment and extend your life, you have to bear the threat of heavenly tribulation." Yao Meng changed her voice and said quietly, "But if there is judging to refine the Sudan, and with the help of the innate Tao embryo, the success rate of enlightenment can even be increased to 60 to 70%. Shuiyi did not answer, her voice was as soft and cold as usual. "So you asked me for the black flame true leaf in the southern wilderness before, was it really for this 9 cauldron refining void pill? Muzian is truly lucky to have a Taoist companion like you," she sighed sincerely. Then she paused and said with a smile, "Although the black flame true leaf is rare in the southern wilderness, you can still find it if you want to find it, but the Union Willow in Yunzhou may not be that easy. I heard that your relationship with Yunzhou was not that good in the past, right? If you come forward, not to mention the princess, Emperor Daipen will probably doubt your purpose of wanting Yunyanliu. After all, the existence of Yunyanlu can only be used to refine Juding Sudan, because other elixirs cannot use Yunyanlu. Suddenly wanting Yunyanlu for no reason will naturally make people suspicious. What's more, the Yunyan willow grows in a place with no sky and no land in Yunzhou, which is the territory of the Dao princess." She had heard in the past that the relationship between the Qing emperor and the princess was extremely bad, and it might not be that simple to obtain Yunyanliu. "Do you need me to help you?" Shuiyi asked. "It would be best if you can, but even if you come forward, you may not be able to get the Yunyanliu." Yao Mengliu frowned lightly. Although Nanhuang and Yunzhou seemed to be cooperating secretly, Yunyanliu, a natural and earthly treasure, was too special. Even if Shui spoke, Yunzhou would probably be wary. After all, who would want a new enlightenment to be born from other forces for no reason? I will try my best to get Yunyanliu for him, Shui smiled. Yao Meng smiled lightly and said, I hope so. But I couldn't help but sigh in my heart. It was not easy to get the princess to let go. And even in Yunzhou, Yunyan willow is an extremely rare natural treasure. It only takes just 7 days from picking the Yunyan willow to withering due to the loss of spiritual energy. Because of these harsh conditions, it is impossible to preserve it even on the princess. Clouds and willows. The only way to find Yunyanliu is to ask the princess to search for it herself, or to send someone to search. After all, this cannot be avoided by the princess. Thinking of this, Yao Meng's thoughts quickly returned to reality and said quietly, take it one step at a time. In short, if I have to, I will go to Yunzhou myself. Luo Tan asked me to go to the dormitory to find her at night. Does this mean she wants to have sex with me? Back in the guest room, Musian dismissed the maid in the guest room, and then began to think about everything that happened today. In Musian's view, although Luo Tan seemed to have a desire to attack and wanted the natural furnace cauldron to complement the natural furnace cauldron, but in fact, she was still a little shy in her heart, or she could not overcome the hurdle in her heart. So if he goes to the dormitory to look for her tonight, he might have to take the initiative. And the fiancée of Emperor Daipen is also interesting. Not only is she like Ling Er, she is also involved in the Great Dao. Her furnace is even inherently connected to the Great Dao. If the spirit dragon is Dao's beloved creation, then this princess must be the chosen daughter. Then again, if Ling Er wants to ascend, he first needs to get the resonance of Dao, but in the past, he never knew how to influence Dao. Warm reminder, if you find that clicking the next page will force you to jump to other websites, please use the chapter error or contact us at the bottom to inform us. We will handle it as soon as possible. Thank you for your understanding. This princess, maybe there is something she can do? After all, her cauldron itself is connected to the avenue. When Musian thought of this, the figure of the princess appeared in his mind for no reason. Then, he quickly shook his head and sighed secretly. When it comes to the secret of the avenue, even Emperor Daipen has probably never told the secret about the avenue from the princess, let alone an outsider like him. Unless, we can establish a good relationship with that princess first. Moreover, the Yunyan willow needed for Juding to refine Sudan will also be obtained from Yunzhou. It seems that I shouldn't have teased her before, but should have licked her. Musian suddenly realized this. If she were a normal beauty, Musian would naturally not like to offend her. But the princess had previously admitted that she did not want him to get close to Luo Tan, and even offered to give him an imperial medicine to keep him away from Luo Tan. Although he knew that the princess was thinking about Luo Tan, it still made people dissatisfied. I just didn't expect that now I have to find a way to make friends with her. That's all, let's not think about these things first. Musian shook his head to disperse the thoughts in his mind, then walked out of the guest room and took out an ink-colored cauldron in front of the courtyard. The Xian-grade cauldron is not particularly expensive, but it is enough to refine those 4th and 5th grade pills. Rather, with Musian's current level of not even a 2nd grade alchemist, it would be too extravagant to use a cauldron above the Xian grade. Musian recalled the teachings of the Empress when he talked with Luo Tan today, while taking out the medicinal materials needed for the 3rd grade pill. According to Luo Tan, the higher the grade of the pill, the greater the spiritual energy of the heaven that can be contained. He wanted to verify whether what Luo Tan said was true. You all retreat first. No one is allowed to approach this place without my order. Musian turned his head and ordered the 2 maids in the courtyard. After the maids retreated, Musian urged the spiritual energy and put the medicinal materials of the 3rd grade Ningxin pill into the cauldron one by one. Sen Luo Lu, Dian Xing Shen, and then put in the ancient Ganoderma. Muzian looked at the alchemy book in his hand and took out the medicinal materials in the ring and put them into the cauldron. These herbs are part of the monthly salary issued by Lianji section. The herbs themselves are not rare, but they can be sold at a high price on the market. Now, they are all used by Muzian to try to make pills. The flame of the cauldron began to burn, and Muzian's mental power was completely focused in front of the cauldron. In the distance, two maids looked over here with some curiosity, wondering why someone is still making such low-level pills. At this time, a maid seemed to have noticed something and subconsciously turned her head to look at the gate of the yard. When she saw a woman with a pink veil, a slim figure, and gentle eyes, she almost blurted out, "Princess." Before she finished speaking, the princess had already extended an index finger to her lips and made a hush sound. When she approached, two maids came up and asked in a low voice, "Why did the princess come here? This is where Master Mu rests. Did you come to the wrong place?" The gentle and mature princess looked sideways slightly, blinking a pair of gentle and lovely eyes, and whispered, "I came to find him. You can leave first, I will protect him here, nothing will happen," she ordered again. The two maids looked at each other, hesitated for a moment, and finally nodded slightly, "Yes." It still failed. The third-grade elixir is indeed a bit difficult for me. Muzian looked at the medicinal materials in the cauldron that had long been turned into powder, and couldn't help shaking his head and sighing, feeling a little distressed about his own medicinal materials. If the first and second grade elixirs are still the level that outsiders can refine, then from the third grade onwards, it is a field that only alchemists can step into. Although Muzian has the qualifications of an alchemist, he was basically obsessed with beauty in the past, and his cultivation was abandoned for a long time, not to mention alchemy. Fortunately, I am in Yuzhou now. If there is any question about the elixir that I don't understand, I can ask Luo Tan directly, so I can avoid a lot of detours. Muzian comforted himself in his heart, and then he planned to put away the cauldron. At this moment, a clear, pleasant and gentle voice suddenly came from behind him, "Looking at the spiritual energy you just condensed, it seems that you have good alchemy qualifications, but now you are not even a second-grade alchemist. It's really a waste of such good qualifications." Muzian turned his head and saw the princess who was standing behind him at some point. She changed into a dress embroidered with crabapple flowers, matched with a plain long skirt. Her hair was carefully combed, and embellished with a valuable jade hairpin. She was dignified and beautiful, with a sense of homeliness of a wife. Of course, if you know her, you will know that this princess looks gentle, but in fact she is not as simple as she shows. "Princess, you came to my residence for no reason, but what's the important matter?" Muzian was suspicious, with a somewhat teasing tone. "Are you here to persuade me to leave Luton again? If you can give me 5 imperial medicines, I can consider it." The princess glanced at Muzian with her beautiful eyes and gave him a charming roll of the eyes. 5 imperial medicines. Why didn't he go and rob? Even if you look at the entire Yunzhou, it may not be possible to take out more than 3 imperial medicines. Among the 9 states, only Dongzhou is known to have more than 5 imperial medicines. The imperial medicines cultivated by other forces in the past for several generations are now very few. I'm not here to persuade you to leave Luton, but I smelled an unpleasant smell when I came out to relax, so I came in to take a look. I didn't expect that Master Mu was refining pills here, the princess said lightly. If you don't usually make pills, and suddenly want to make a pill of a higher grade than your own, it's just a waste of medicinal materials. Are you mocking me for overestimating my own abilities, trying to make a third-grade pill when I'm not even a second-grade alchemist? Muzian smiled. Although your highness is a great master of the Dao, you are surprisingly a bit vindictive. The princess pursed her rosy lips under her veil and said calmly, I'm not vindictive, I'm just telling the truth. Muzian sighed lightly. In fact, if I have to say it, it's Mu who should be vindictive. This time I was simply hit by an unprovoked disaster, I was inexplicably remembered by the great Pen Emperor, and I'm afraid I won't even dare to go to Yunzhou in the future. That was the great Pen Emperor's initiative, and I have nothing to do with him." The princess frowned slightly, and although her tone was gentle, she was cold to the great Pen Emperor. "Of course I know this, but..." Musian hesitated slightly. "Just what?" "Master Mu, why don't you just say it directly?" the princess said. "Just, looking at the attitude of the great Pen Emperor today, it seems that he cares a lot about your highness. I'm afraid he doesn't think that you have nothing to do with him." Hearing this, the princess couldn't help but frown. Musian looked at the beautiful woman calmly and continued, "Your highness, are you here to make fun of me today?" The princess returned to reality from her previous thoughts and said, "I know why the Green Emperor went to the southern wilderness. Luo Tan has told me before. Therefore, I also know what you want." Musian's eyes moved slightly, but he didn't say anything, wanting to hear the princess's next words. The princess smiled, "As long as you agree to one condition of mine, I can give you everything you want." "Is there such a good thing? Does that mean I can ask you to?" Musian was talking nonsense in his heart, but he didn't agree immediately. "What do you want me to do? Why not tell me first? With your current strength, there is nothing you can do to help me." The princess's beautiful eyes were as soft as water, and she opened her red lips slightly. "It's just that I want to make sure that her vision of people is correct. So, I want you to refine a pill." Musian raised his eyebrows slightly and said, "What pill?" The princess took out a pill that she had just received from Luo Tan not long ago from her ring, and stared at Musian. "Second grade pill, Xiao Huan Dan. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment." So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 505. Second grade elixir, Xiao Huan Dan. It stands to reason that anyone with a little exposure to alchemy can refine this elixir. How could the princess want him to refine this elixir for no reason? Her Royal Highness the princess is a little bit arrogant. Musian glanced at the princess calmly and said, "Is it enough to refine a small rejuvenation pill?" The woman was also looking at him. Her eyes were as clear as late autumn pool water. With a bit of tenderness, she nodded and said, "That's right, just refine the Xiao Huan Dan." "Then Mu, it's better to be respectful than to obey. I hope the princess can fulfill today's agreement in the future." Musian raised his hands to bow, and then took out the refining materials for Xiao Huan Dan from Nag. Although he could not refine the third grade elixir, he had already refined the Xiao Huan Dan countless times when he was in Lianji section. It was not difficult for him to refine the Xiao Huan Dan. The princess stood not far away, quietly watching Musian's alchemy technique. Although she doesn't understand alchemy at all, as long as the small returning pill that Musian refines is the same as the one she has in her hand, it is enough to prove something. For example, why Luo Tan chose him. Did he simply want to practice that, or, Luo Tan had other ideas? Based on her understanding of Luo Tan, she believed it was the latter. Nearly a quarter of an hour later, the princess could vaguely smell a faint scent of medicine, and her eyes fell on the cauldron in front of Musian. Musian took out 6 round-colored elixirs from the cauldron, put them into jade bottles and handed them to the princess. "Your Highness, the small return pill you asked for." The princess uncorked the jade bottle and took out one of the small returning pills. Although she doesn't know how to make alchemy, what kind of elixir has she not seen before? Whether the Xiao Huan Dan in her hand is the same as the one made by Musian can be seen through at a glance. After lowering her head to compare the 2 small returning pills, the princess subconsciously raised her head and stared at Musian. They are elixirs refined by different techniques, and the small rejuvenation elixir that Musian just refined does not contain any spiritual energy from heaven. It seems that I guessed wrong. Your Highness the Princess, Musian called out tentatively. Well, you tell me. The princess came back from her thoughts. Even though she was veiled, Musian could still feel the disappointment in her eyes. Do you have anything else? Musian asked. The princess quickly came to her senses, shook her head gently, and smiled reservedly. I'm troublesome for Mr. Mu today, these few small pills are enough. She paused and continued, I know the purpose of Emperor Qing's coming to Yuzhou. I will find a way to take you to get Yunyanliu, but then I'm afraid you will have to go to Yunzhou with me. The Yunyan Willow can only be kept for 7 days. It is best to wait until almost all the other heavenly materials and earthly treasures have been found, and then go get the Yunyan Willow and let Luo Ten refine the 9 cauldrons to refine the void pill for you. She actually knew Yao Meng's purpose? Musian was a little surprised. As if she guessed what Musian was thinking, the princess said in a calm tone, no matter what, I am the princess of Yunzhou. I can know a little bit about the Qing Emperor's movements. The princess paused and glanced at Musian faintly, it's just that I didn't expect that the person she would cultivate with in the end would be you. But since she has made up her mind, I can't stop her. I hope you can cherish this opportunity and successfully understand the rhyme of Taoism. The princess spoke again. From the princess's point of view, the relationship between Musian and Luo Ten is now so close, and Emperor Qing is not in Yuzhou, it is probably only a matter of time before their relationship takes a further step. Musian nodded reservedly, and then quickly showed a look of embarrassment, saying, but if I go to Yunzhou with Her Royal Highness the Princess, Emperor Daipen will probably know about this immediately, right? If he, what should I do if it's like this again? His Majesty Luo Ten is here today, and this is Yuzhou, and Emperor Daipen has something to ask for from your Majesty, so he reluctantly left. But if I go to Yunzhou with you in the future, Emperor Daipen's side, you will definitely be angry if you know that I am walking with you, right? The Daipen Emperor is so scary. The Princess of Yunzhou shook her head gently and said gently, behind you is Emperor Qing, and he will not offend Emperor Qing for your sake. And as long as I'm here, he won't do anything to you. When Musian heard this, he was startled for a moment, and then his face showed a touch of emotion. Your Highness, Princess, are you willing to protect me? The princess looked at the moved and reassuring expression on Musian's handsome face and couldn't help but smile. I promised you that as long as you refine the Xiaohuan Dan, I will take you to find Yunyanliu. During this period, I am naturally responsible for your safety. It's just a pity. She paused and sighed inwardly, but did not continue. It's a pity that she guessed the wrong person. Judging from the Xiaohuan Dan that Musian refined today, there probably is no relationship between him and heaven. What pity does Her Royal Highness the Princess mean? Musian asked. The princess came back to her senses and smiled gently, it's nothing. After saying that, he gave Musian one last look. For some reason, when she looked into this child's eyes, she always felt an inexplicable urge to be attracted to him. Since she is such a powerful person who is connected to the Great Road, it is not surprising that Luo Ten would be attracted to him. There is no doubt that Musian does have some secrets, but this secret has nothing to do with the heavenly court. The princess gently stroked her full chest with her slender hands, feeling her originally throbbing mood gradually calming down. I thought she was close to the secret of the celestial ascension, but it seems that she thought too much. I just don't know what Luo Ten meant by her previous statement that she had discovered the secret of the celestial ascension. Now Luo Ten should still be reviewing memorials. After all, because of the Sabbath recently, all the states have been more or less busy. I think I should wait until nightfall to see Luo Ten. I'll go see her tonight. In theory, a small pill containing the spiritual energy of the heavenly court is far from enough to make a person celestial ascension. What exactly does Luo Ten want to do? Not only is she curious, but she is also worried that Luo Ten will go astray. After all, in these years, the great Peng Emperor has even been a little obsessed in order to celestial ascension. Although I am almost there, the princess smiled in her heart, stared at Mucian for a moment, then pursed her plump red lips and smiled, since Master Mu is still refining the elixir, I won't bother you today. Farewell, your highness. Mucian watched the princess's graceful figure disappear from his sight, and then heaved a sigh of relief. Why don't you tell her? At this time, a voice with a bit of sarcasm suddenly came from the side, if she knew that you were born as a furnace, I think she would be much kinder to you. Mucian turned his head in the direction of the voice and saw Wei Mengru in the shadow. She was wearing a slightly loose goose yellow dress today, paired with a dark pleated long skirt, her hair was neatly combed in a bun, and she seemed to exude an ominous mysterious black mist, which was extremely cold and beautiful. Of course, if you are familiar with Wei Mengru, you will know that this cold and beautiful woman will be easily shy if she is teased, no matter how she pretends. Not everyone is interested in the natural furnace, not to mention that she is born to connect to the avenue, and my natural furnace may not be able to help her. Besides, Luo Tan doesn't seem to want to let the princess know about this so early. Mucian naturally took Wei Mengru's hand, pulled her to his side, and smiled, it's not too late to tell her when we go to Yunzhou in the future. By the way, seeing me close to other girls, won't Sister Mengru be jealous? Mucian suddenly asked. Wei Mengru snorted and raised her snow-white chin condescendingly, you think too highly of yourself. It's just a bug, what's there to be jealous of? Then I'm relieved. Mucian heard this, as if relieved. What do you mean by this? Wei Mengru frowned, feeling that something was wrong. Today Luo Tan summoned me to the bedroom to wait for her, so I may have to go to the bedroom later, Mucian explained. Seeing the young master's undisguised actions, Wei Mengru's eyes flickered at first, but then she noticed the young master's teasing eyes and snorted coldly, it's up to you. I don't have to stay by your side every day. I feel much more relaxed. After saying that, she turned around, and her body seemed to emit an illusory black mist, hiding in the darkness, and in a flash she returned to the guest room where she lived. Mucian was in the courtyard, slowly packing up the cauldron, alchemy herbs, etc., and then silently counted down in his heart. After an incense stick, he came to Wei Mengru's room and knocked on the door of the maid. Didn't Luo Tan have something to see you? Does the young master have anything else to do? A very cold response came from inside. Mucian said calmly, Sister Mengru, can I come in? There was no response from the room. Mucian pushed open the door and saw a beautiful woman sitting on the couch with an expressionless face. Her complicated and exquisite dress made her temperament particularly cool. Seeing Mucian, Wei Mengru turned her face away and said coldly, aren't you going to see Luo Tan soon? Why do you have the leisure to come to my place? Are you here to kill time? Mucian closed the door and shook his head and said, after thinking about it, I decided to accompany Sister Mengru first, let Luo Tan wait first. After saying that, Mucian walked to the couch and reached out to hold Wei Mengru's cold little hand. Wei Mengru immediately pushed his hand away, but Mucian did not give up. He went a step further and held her little hand tightly. This time Wei Mengru did not break free again, obviously acquiescing. Mucian lifted her chin, and then slowly moved his face closer to Wei Mengru. Just when his lips were about to touch the girl's lips, he stopped and suddenly whispered, Sister Mengru, let me give you a gift. When he said this, he took out a beautiful little box from the ring. Wei Mengru woke up from her daze just now, looked at Mucian doubtfully, and then opened the small box to take a look. It was a black mesh stocking that she had never seen before. Aware of Mucian's expectant eyes, Wei Mengru's eyes gradually became cold, and she looked at the young master with disdain, is this a gift? It's obvious that he wants to see it himself. Please, Sister Mengru, this is one of my dreams, Mucian asked sincerely. Wei Mengru stared at the young master with some doubts, what do you want me to do? I want Sister Mengru to wear this. Wayman grew, then what? Then look at your master with a look of disdain, the rest depends on your performance. I believe that Sister Mengru will be fine, Musian said. After all, Wei Mengru has the attributes of a maid, such as a sharp tongue, aloofness, and tsundere. Although she may not be aware of this, for Musian, this is an attribute that cannot be rejected. Wei Mengru took the small box and glared at the young master. Are you a pervert? Musian said looked at Wei Mengru, and said sincerely, that's it, Sister Mengru can scold more, it's okay. Wei Mengru. Government Affairs Hall. Your Majesty, the princess went to see Mr. Mu again today. In front of the hall where Luo Tan was reviewing memorials, a maid was kneeling respectfully on the soft lichen, reporting everything that happened to Musian today. If you look closely, it is not difficult to see that this maid is one of the maids responsible for serving Musian. Luo Tan leaned over the table piled with memorials, and asked with a chuckle, do you know what the princess is going to do? She asked Master Mu to refine a second-grade elixir. Luo Tan hummed softly, and moved his eyes from the memorials to the maid in front of the hall, Xiao Huandan. Yes, your Majesty is wise, the maid said respectfully. Do you need to investigate her purpose? She continued to ask. Luo Tan shook his head slowly, no need, the princess is born with extraordinary perception. Even the powerful people of the same realm cannot get close to her without being noticed by her, and she will not do anything to harm Musian. You can leave. Yes. Luo Tan tilted his head to look at the bronze bell hanging in the corner, and then whispered, by the way, I need to be in seclusion tonight. No one is allowed to enter the bedroom to disturb me without orders. After speaking, she stood up and prepared to leave. At this time, a hurried sound of footsteps sounded in the distance, accompanied by the arrival of a spy. Your Majesty, just reported that it seems that the apostles of the Sabbath have clashed with the students of Zunyun Academy, and there is a big disturbance there now. Luo Tan paused slightly, frowning slightly, I know, I will go there in person later. In Yuzhou, the status of Zunyun Academy is equivalent to that of Lianji sect in Dongzhou. The apostles of the Sabbath have made trouble there, even Luo Tan can't just stand by and watch, at least he needs to know the details. She stepped on the snow-white jade boots and walked gracefully to the door of the lobby. She looked up at the hazy moonlight, her fingertips resting on her red lips, and sighed slightly. It seems that she will have to go back later. It was night. The moon was bright and the stars were sparse. Musian took a shower and left the villa refreshed. The spiritual energy in the natural furnace seemed to have decreased a lot. Because Luo Tan had given the order before, Musian passed through the front hall unimpeded and walked into the back hall along a luxurious avenue. The maids and attendants along the way all bowed slightly. Only after Musian left did they gather in groups of 3 or 2 to discuss the identity of this young man in a low voice. At the same time, on the other side, the princess was sitting alone in the bedroom, flipping through books boredly, waiting for Luo Tan to come back. Luo Tan had just left the palace not long ago, and it seemed that he went to Zunyun Academy because of the Sabbath. It looked like he might not be able to come back tonight. Wait for another hour or 2. If Luo Tan hasn't come back yet, go back tonight. The princess was thinking about this when she suddenly heard a respectful voice from outside the palace, Your Majesty, Musian came here as agreed. I wonder if he can enter the palace now. Musian? What was he doing in the middle of the night in the bedroom? And it looked like Luo Tan asked him to come. The princess narrowed her eyes, recalling the scenes between Musian and Luo Tan that she had seen during the day. After a moment of hesitation, she raised her hand and gently took off her veil. A soft white light danced between her palms, gently caressing her beautiful face. The road roared. The next moment, the princess changed from a gentle beauty with a mature charm to a noble and elegant empress. The dress she wore also became a luxurious snow-white dress. She stepped on a pair of sexy snow-white jade boots, revealing the delicate skin between the hem of her skirt and her calves. "Come in," she spoke in an elegant voice. Not long after, Musian walked into the bedroom, looked at the woman sitting on the soft couch, and immediately raised his hand to bow, with a respectful face. "Your Majesty, I have kept you waiting for a long time." Luo Tan's eyes flashed with a strange look, and then smiled and said, "It's okay, anyway, come and sit first." So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 506. According to the rules of the palace, anyone in the palace who wants to enter Luo Tan's bedroom needs to wait outside the palace, and can only enter the bedroom after Luo Tan's permission. But in this huge Izhou, there are two exceptions. One is the princess who saved Luo Tan in the past, and the other is Musian, who has been in the limelight recently. Unlike the princess, Luo Tan had previously specifically instructed that Musian should not be stopped no matter where he goes. Therefore, Musian can appear in front of this bedroom so unimpeded at this moment. However, I am afraid that no one would have thought that the person who appeared in the bedroom at this moment was not Luo Tan, who had an appointment with Musian, but the princess of Yunzhou. At the signal of Luo Tan, Musian came to sit down beside the soft couch, feeling the quietness of the night, and noticing the gaze of the empress next to him. He said reservedly, "By the way, Your Majesty, why is it so quiet tonight? I only saw a few servants on the way here. Where did they go?" "I asked them to evacuate the bedroom first," the princess said with a faint smile. She didn't know exactly how Luo Tan ordered the servants, but when she came into the bedroom before, she hardly saw any maids and attendants, so she had such a guess. "You should know why I came to you tonight," the princess asked a question lightly. This seemed to be an inquiry, but in fact it was to find out the purpose of Luo Tan asking Musian to come to the bedroom for no reason tonight. Musian nodded slightly. "I know." The corner of the princess' mouth raised, and a happy arc inadvertently appeared. After all, he was a little monk who had never experienced any major events. He bit the hook by himself after a little bait was put. "Tell me about it." She imitated her best friend's noble and elegant appearance and asked in a casual and elegant tone. Unexpectedly, she saw Musian hesitated slightly and asked, "Is Your Majesty really ready?" The princess blinked her amorous and charming eyes and asked in a tender voice, "What preparations?" "That's..." Musian glanced at the beautiful empress and hesitated a little. "What's that?" "Just say it if you have anything to say." The princess frowned slightly, her tone revealed a bit of non-dispute, and her beautiful eyes stared at Musian. Musian shook his head. "Yes, it's not like Mu to be so hesitant." The princess raised her delicate eyebrows slightly and was about to speak. But at this moment, she suddenly felt a gentle palm wrapped around her little hand. The princess trembled in her heart and almost subconsciously wanted to pull her hand out. After all, even the Lord of Yunzhou, Daipen Emperor, had never touched her hand. But now she was being held tightly by a strange boy, which inevitably made her flustered and shy. "Your Majesty!" Musian called out tentatively, secretly spying on the woman in front of him. The mature and sexy beauty sat on the soft couch, her beautiful eyes flickering, and her noble and elegant temperament seemed to have a little more panic, and her beautiful face was flushed with shyness. "What are you doing?" the princess asked in a calm tone as much as possible. Although she had known for a long time that Musian and Luo Tan had a very close relationship, she was still a little shy to see that the other party was holding her hand so unscrupulously. Musian shook his head. "Nothing, it's just that I didn't get closer to Your Majesty in the garden today, so I couldn't help but miss Your Majesty after returning to the guest room." "Aren't you worried that the Qing Emperor would notice it?" the princess asked in a low voice. "If she finds out because of my intimacy with Your Majesty, then I have no regrets." Musian held the beautiful woman's soft little hand and gazed at her affectionately. The princess looked at Musian silently, but did not say anything. Did this guy deceive Luo Tan with such sweet words? But there were many monks who pursued Luo Tan in the past. The medicine emperor was not a simple little girl and would not be deceived by such words. Seeing that Luotan did not resist too much, Muzian became more bold and stretched out his hand to hold the empress's slender and soft waist, hugging this plump and graceful body into his arms. Then, he lowered his head and whispered in her ear, "Your Majesty, then let's do it tonight." The princess' heart trembled slightly, and the beautiful legs under the gorgeous white skirt involuntarily came together, and her slender hand subconsciously grasped the hem of her skirt. She originally just wanted to trick Muzian's secret, but who would have thought that this little monk was so bold since he just entered the bedroom. He actually dared to hold Luotan in his arms so unscrupulously. Even if the great Hideo restrained his breath, he would still emit a kind of pressure in the dark, which was like blood pressure, but in the end, Muzian had no psychological pressure at all, and was even intimate with him. At the moment, she couldn't do anything that violated the image of Luotan. After all, Muzian's actions at this moment were probably tacitly agreed by Luotan. If she pushed him away now, wouldn't she not get anything out of him, but let this guy take advantage of her for nothing? "It seems that you do know why I summoned you tonight." The princess took a breath gently, so that her sexy and cold face would not show drastic emotional changes such as shyness. Her shoulder was close to Muzian's shoulder, and she seemed to be able to smell the strange and warm breath on the boy. Such a breath gave people an inexplicable sense of security, so that the princess couldn't help but close her eyes slightly. At this time, Muzian's voice also came to the princess's ears. "Mu naturally knows, Your Majesty came to me tonight, it should be because of the agreement between you and me before." Agreement? What other agreement did Luotan have with a little monk? The princess slowly opened her eyes, her face was stained with a charming blush, and she whispered, "It's good that you still remember the agreement. That's natural. Only when Your Majesty's natural furnace and cauldron complement each other can we achieve each other. But I'm curious, if we are always intimate, can we keep repeating endlessly and constantly supply each other with huge spiritual energy?" The princess didn't hear what Muzian said next. After hearing the word natural furnace and cauldron, her eyes slowly widened and stared at Muzian in astonishment. At this moment, the princess seemed to have a long sealed door slowly opening in her heart. When she connected all the things that happened today together, she suddenly felt a sense of sudden enlightenment. There must be no problem with her disguise tonight. Even the powerful people in the Hideo realm could not recognize her identity, let alone Muzian. In other words, the other party did not lie, he is indeed a natural furnace. I just don't know what method Muzian used. Even she didn't realize that this big boy actually had a natural furnace. Natural furnace, it turns out that he is a natural furnace. No wonder Luotan cares so much about him. This little cultivator has a second furnace. When the princess thought of this, she suddenly became clear, and her curiosity about Muzian soon became stronger. She remembered that she asked Muzian to refine the Xiaohuan today. The Xiaohuan that Muzian refined today has the very common Zhu spiritual energy. So the question is, when he refined the pill, which furnace did he use to refine the spiritual energy? The princess's beautiful eyes flickered, and her mind was full of thoughts, thinking about what happened today. His Majesty is a little strange today. Muzian was suspicious and secretly stared at the Empress in his arms. She was dressed just like before, in a luxurious snow-white gown inlaid with gold and silver threads, with long hair and plump red lips, giving people a stunning profile. But for some reason, she seemed to lack a bit of nobility and elegance, but had a bit more mature and beautiful aura that could fascinate men. And such a mature and beautiful aura is the easiest to attract younger people. At least Muzian was indeed attracted by the charming face of Luotan at this moment. Muzian's face slowly approached Luotan, staring at the beauty in his arms, wanting to finish what he couldn't do in the garden during the day. At the same time, the princess was lowering her eyes slightly, trying to piece together the natural furnace cauldron and the various clues found today. At this time, she suddenly felt the warm breath brought by the boys breathing on her face, and the princess was awakened as if by a sudden realization. The moment she raised her head, she saw the handsome face of the boy slowly approaching her. What does he want to do? The princess' heart trembled slightly, and she subconsciously raised her hand to press Musian's shoulder, trying to push him away. However, she was still a step too late. When she stretched out her hand, Musian grabbed her wrist with one hand, and at the same time he slowly lowered his head and occupied the woman's soft lips. The princess was about to push Musian away, but at this time, a special spiritual energy quietly flowed from Musian's natural furnace into the princess' furnace. Just like the small Huandan given by Luo Tan today, this is the spiritual energy of the heaven. The princess' eyes gradually became stained with a layer of misty water mist, and she looked at Musian with a dazed look. After an unknown amount of time, her eyes suddenly widened, and she finally woke up, realizing what kind of immoral actions she had made tonight. She pushed Musian away violently, and before Musian could come back to his senses from his bewilderment, she immediately stood up, looked at Musian in panic, and said, I remembered that I still have some things to deal with tonight, let's talk about it another day. The moment she turned around, the space crack in front of her was torn apart out of thin air, as if to escape from the scene. She quickened her pace and stepped into the space crack. Musian stared at her, the woman's face was flushed, her earlobes were slightly hot, and the translucent crystal earrings swayed gently with her steps, which was extremely charming. It seems that she is not mentally prepared yet. Musian left the bedroom, thinking about what happened today, and couldn't help sighing in his heart. He knew that Luo Tan was not as calm as he seemed, just like Yao Meng in the past. At the beginning, the fairy was also reserved and shy, but as the days went by, she gradually completed her evolution. And this Medicine King, I think it's the same situation now. It seems that it will take some time. Musian was walking on the corridor of the bedroom with some emotion, and suddenly he heard two maids whispering something not far away. What are you talking about? What happened to Zunyun Academy? Musian heard some of the conversation between the two and couldn't help but greet them. Ah, it's Mr. Mu, I'm sorry, I was rude just now. The two maids immediately apologized hurriedly when they saw the person in their sight. It's okay, what were you talking about just now? I remember that Zunyun Academy is not the most sacred place in Yuzhou. Did something happen? Musian asked. The two maids saw that Musian seemed to be asking sincerely, and then saw his gentle smile. After looking at each other, they chattered and explained one by one. Musian listened to the explanations of the two and couldn't help but understand. With the arrival of the Sabbath a few days ago, some foreign apostles collected some luck in various states according to the past rules as food for the god. Whether a state is strong or not is related to the luck of a state, and luck, which seems to be illusory, is actually related to the prosperity of a state. As long as there is no war, the people in the mortal world and the cultivators in the immortal world are not in civil strife. Even if some of the luck is lost, it can be made up after a period of time. Therefore, if the apostles of the Sabbath act low-key, the great powers of Juzhu will turn a blind eye. After all, that little luck is nothing to them. However, even if most apostles act low-key, it is inevitable that the public security will plummet due to many matters during the period of collecting luck. Firstly, some foreign apostles will inevitably have some friction and conflict with local monks. Secondly, monks from enemy states will also take this opportunity to secretly stir up trouble. This is the case with Zunyun Academy this time. Fortunately, before this, Luo Tan had thought of a way. She had people set up a huge and indestructible white jade platform in the four directions of the east, south, west and north of the outer courtyard island of Zunyun Academy, and named it Tianbang Platform. The original intention of setting up the Tianbang platform was to give competition to those monks who like to make trouble during the Sabbath. There are formations on it, which will not affect the students in Zunyun Academy. If you are not happy with someone, don't force it, just stand on the stage and say, XXX, if you have the guts, go on stage and solo, father and son game, lose and call daddy. Generally, when the other party hears the troublemaker provoking them in front of so many young and beautiful girls in Zunyun Academy, most of them can't stand it, and some even rush to Zunyun Academy to fight on the same day. In this way, if there is any hatred between the two sides, or if there is any conflict between the foreign apostles and the Yuzhou monks, they can go on stage and fight openly. First, it gives both sides a platform to resolve the conflict, and secondly, it can also let the students of Zunyun Academy see how the monks outside compete. It's really worthy of Luo Tan, this method is really good. Musian smiled, so there was another conflict in Zunyun Academy today, and it was a conflict between foreign apostles and the elders of the academy, so she hurried to the academy just now. The two maids nodded, yes, today I learned that the elders of Zunyun Academy and foreign apostles had a quarrel, and His Majesty went to Zunyun Academy after reviewing the memorial. Musian became a little interested and asked, can outsiders enter Zunyun Academy now? The maid nodded slightly, the outer courtyard can, but for the inner courtyard, only the disciples of Zunyun Academy can enter. Musian first hummed, and then he began to realize that something was wrong. Wait, what did you say just now? His Majesty went to Zunyun Academy after reviewing the memorials? Then she has never been to the bedroom. One of the maids nodded gently, I saw His Majesty leave the palace with my own eyes. Musian was stunned. Luo Tan had never been to the bedroom, but went directly to Zunyun Academy. Who was the woman in the room just now? If you want to go to Zunyun Academy, do you mind going with me? Just when Musian was still in shock, a woman's gentle voice came from not far outside the palace. Musian tilted his head to look, and the princess with a slender and charming figure had appeared at the door of the palace without knowing when, with a veil on her face, and a pair of gentle eyes stared at him quietly. But for some reason, there seemed to be a bit of resentment in that gentle look. Musian hesitated for a moment. What's wrong? Does Mr. Mu dislike me? The princess tilted her head, her voice was still gentle, but there was a bit of unkindness in her tone. Musian came back to his senses, smiled and nodded, okay, then I'll trouble your highness the princess. Just realized that it's the end of the month again without me noticing, please give me some blades and monthly tickets. The monthly tickets and blades will be reset on the 1st. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 507. Musian took the carriage and finally arrived at the gate of Zunyun Academy half an hour later. After getting off the carriage, he came to the other side of the carriage, lifted the curtain, and stretched out his hand to the hostess in the curtain. The princess stepped down from the carriage, glanced at Musian, and did not stretch out her hand for him to hold, but jumped off the carriage by herself. Unlike the way she was dressed today, she was wearing a white long dress, revealing her fair jade neck and delicate collarbone, not much skin was exposed, and the dress wrapped her delicate body, highlighting the size of her tall and straight chest. Her dressing style was quite homely. Because of the veil, Musian could not see her makeup, but just by looking at her beautiful eyes, he could feel the mature and charming charm that only wives have. But tonight, she seemed to be much colder towards Musian, which even Musian could clearly feel. It seems that the person in the bedroom just now is indeed the princess. Musian looked at the princess with a strange look in his eyes. He felt something was wrong when he entered the hall and talked to the other party, so he tried to make some intimate gestures. But no matter what, he couldn't have thought that the woman in the hall just now would be the princess. The arrival of the two immediately attracted the attention of many students in the nearby academy. No matter what era, people with good looks are always more likely to get attention from others. At this time, a crisp and soft voice suddenly came from not far away, Mr. Mu. The girl called out tentatively with a tone of uncertainty. Musian turned his head and saw a woman in a pink and white dress. Her appearance almost made many students in the academy look sideways. Why is senior sister Shuixian in the outer courtyard? Isn't she already a disciple of the chief elder of the inner courtyard? Today, the third elder of the outer courtyard had a conflict with the apostles of the Sabbath, and many students from the inner courtyard came to join in the fun. I think she came to see it too. Who is the monk who talked to senior sister Shuixian? Why have I never seen him before? Could he be from another academy? Some students from the academy were whispering to each other, and their eyes fell on Musian intentionally or unintentionally. Ever since Xiao Shuixian went to Lianji sect with Yehuang before, for some reason, the emperor valued her very much. Even after returning to Yizhou, he kept Xiao Shuixian by his side for some time to guide her, so that Xiao Shuixian's alchemy skills have undergone qualitative changes. In Zunyun Academy, Xiao Shuixian's strength is now ranked second, but among her peers, her alchemy skills are already ranked first. In addition to her good family background and beauty, her popularity in the academy has always been ranked in the top 3. It is no wonder that her greeting at this moment will attract the attention of so many students in the academy. Musian noticed the gaze of the little beauty not far away, and couldn't help but reveal a gentle smile. Miss Xiao, long time no see. Hasn't he always been in Dongzhou in the past? Why would there be someone he knows in Zunyun Academy? The princess looked at the girl calmly. Xiao Narcissus's eyes also stayed on the princess for a moment, and an inexplicable alert rose in her heart. For some reason, although I have never seen this woman's face, just through the princess's mature and sexy figure and even the gentle temperament on her body, it is not difficult to imagine what kind of intoxicating beauty this woman has under the veil. Why did Mr. Mu come to Zunyun Academy? Xiao Narcissus quickly retracted his gaze and asked in a somewhat gentle tone. But there seemed to be a hint of expectation in his eyes. Musian smiled and said, I came to Yizhou for some things. I didn't expect your academy to be so lively today, so I came to take a look. Xiao Shuixian's eyes dimmed quickly, but she quickly hid the disappointment in her eyes and smiled. In that case, I'll take you there. Today, the 3 elders of the outer courtyard are fighting with an apostle from a foreign land. I think it hasn't started yet. She paused and continued, Your Majesty is there today. The white jade platform on the north side of Yizhou Zunyun Academy is set up on an island called Flying Fish. There are formations on the platform all year round, and many monks come and go every day. Compared with the past, the area around the white jade platform on the north side is obviously much more lively today. The reason is that the people fighting on the platform today are not ordinary monks, but the elders of the outer courtyard of Zunyun Academy. At this moment, Luo Tan is sitting in front of the platform with other elders of Zunyun Academy, waiting for the start of the battle. A female elder beside him whispered, Your Majesty, please rest assured. Feng Xian is a 7th grade return to void, and because of his alchemy skills, his mental power is far superior to that of cultivators of the same realm. He will not lose this battle. Luo Tan nodded softly. She was indeed not worried. Although the elders of Zunyun Academy rarely fight with others, their strength is no less than that of cultivators from the outside world. After all, some of the elders here traveled abroad when they were young, and were conquered by Luo Tan's charm after passing through Yizhou, and willingly joined Zunyun Academy to teach disciples. Before that, many of them were once ruthless people in Zhizhou, but they often restrained their edge in front of the students of the academy. Tonight, the foreign apostles took the lead in provoking trouble, and I am afraid that they did not investigate the identities and origins of the elders of the academy before they rashly challenged them. Luo Tan didn't care about the success or failure of the fight between the two. She came to Zunyun Academy today not to stop the fight between the two. After all, doing so would be too narrow-minded. Luo Tan came here today just to put some pressure on the foreign apostles of the Sabbath. Besides, sometimes doing it yourself can easily win the hearts of the people. With His Majesty here, The arrogance of those foreign apostles just now has been extinguished, the elder on the side said with a smile. Yes, and the students of the academy seem to be very excited. Calculating the time, it seems that the last time Your Majesty came to the academy was about a year ago. A beautiful woman beside Luo Tan smiled softly, glanced at the students of the academy below the stage, and said, Your Majesty personally came to the academy this time. I think these children will practice harder in the future. In Yuzhou, the holy land of alchemy, most cultivators grew up listening to Luo Tan's stories. At the beginning, Yuzhou was not a solid block. The creatures in the Forbidden Land would come out every few hundred years to absorb the essence of the creatures. Until later, a great power in the Hedeo realm was born in Yuzhou. She used immortal gold to smelt and create a cauldron that could turn all things into spiritual energy, suppressed the forbidden creatures in Yuzhou, ended the turmoil, and finally created this prosperous and immortal dynasty. It is precisely because of hearing these stories that most cultivators in Yuzhou blindly worship this queen. The students in Zunyun Academy even regarded her as their goal to pursue. If she could choose them to serve, the whole family would be honored. Therefore, when Luo Tan chose Xiao Shuixian to serve the emperor and teach her alchemy, not only did Xiao Shuixian's name become famous in Zunyun Academy, but the status of the Xiao family also rose steadily in Yuzhou. The beautiful woman couldn't help but stay on the empress in the luxurious white dress for a moment. She was originally admiring the beauty of the empress, but at this moment, she found that His Majesty Luo Tan seemed a little uneasy at the moment. Your Majesty, are you thinking about something? The beautiful woman hesitated. Luo Tan came back to his senses from his thoughts just now, shook his head and smiled, nothing. She asked casually again, when does the competition start? Your Majesty, according to the agreement, it will start in 1 stick of incense. Someone next to him responded respectfully. 1 stick of incense, then it should be in time to go back and see him, Luo Tan thought to herself. Originally, she had arranged for Musian to meet her in the bedroom tonight, but she came to Zunyun Academy instead. However, in less than an hour, he should not go back so soon. Luo Tan thought of this and was about to look away. However, just as she was about to look away, her attention was suddenly attracted by a young man in the crowd. Musian. Beside Musian, there were 2 women, one of whom looked quite pure and lovely. It is not difficult to imagine that she will be a graceful beauty when she grows up. The other woman wore a waisted goose yellow skirt, which was embroidered with plump crabapple flowers. A ribbon outlined her sexy and plump slender waist. She had a sexy figure and a temperament like a ripe peach, as if waiting for others to pick her. Xiao Narcissus and the princess. Why are they here? Luo Tan's casual look just now froze for a moment, and he subconsciously whispered to himself. And logically, shouldn't the princess be extremely disgusted with Musian? Why is she walking with him now? Although she is only the nominal wife of the great Peng Emperor, in the eyes of the world, this princess is already a married woman, when in the outside world, the princess should try to avoid suspicion as much as possible. Luo Tan's eyes flickered, and he stretched out his hand slightly to wave to the personal maid beside him, and then gestured to her. The maid glanced at Musian, immediately understood, turned around and quietly left the platform. Under the leadership of Xiao Shuixian, Musian and the princess passed through the crowd and unknowingly came to the Flying Fish Island on the north side of the white jade platform. There was no one on the platform at the moment, but many monks had gathered under the platform. Most of these monks were students of Zunyun Academy, and they seemed to be very concerned about this battle. Musian scanned these cultivators and saw many good-looking female students wearing skirts, revealing their snow-white and slender legs. Some even wore black silk stockings similar to the one Luo Tan wore when he went to Lianji sect that day. Yuzhou seemed to be more open than other states. It seemed strange to dress like this in the world of immortal cultivation, but in Yuzhou, everyone seemed to be used to dressing like this. What are you looking at, Mr. Mu? Xiao Shuixian's pleasant and melodious voice suddenly came from the side, and her beautiful eyes gazed at Musian gently. Although she didn't dress up deliberately today, her appearance was top-notch anyway. As a result, when Musian came, his eyes wandered over other girls. I just feel a little bit emotional. You seem to be more open here than other states. Musian smiled, his eyes fell on Xiao Shuixian, and continued, actually, there is a sentence that Mu has not said just now. What is it? Xiao Shuixian blinked, and it was obvious that Musian successfully attracted her attention. I came to Yizhou this time because of His Majesty Luo Tan's invitation, but at the same time, I came to Zunyun Academy today because there is someone I want to see here. Xiao Shuixian was stunned for a moment, and soon, under Musian's gaze, a trace of panic flashed in her eyes. She lowered her eyes slightly, combed her hair as if nothing had happened, but her pretty face was a little hot. Musian stared quietly for a moment, and suddenly smiled bitterly. Sorry, you really still blame me for the plan to kill Xiao Hua, right? Hearing this, Xiao Shuixian hurriedly raised her head and said, what are you talking about, Master Mu? If it weren't for you, I'm afraid I wouldn't know that he had been devoured by the foreign evil demon. At that time, he was no longer my brother Xiao Hua. When Xiao Shuixian said this, she lowered her voice again and said, it's better to say that if it weren't for Master Mu, Shuixian might still be deceived by him. Musian was stunned. Don't you blame me. I said that this matter has nothing to do with Master Mu, but you helped Shuixian a lot. Xiao Shuixian shook her head gently. That's great. I thought Miss Shuixian was still blaming me. Musian showed a relieved and gentle smile. His brilliant smile still attracted the attention of many female disciples nearby at night. They couldn't help but look at him, and then their eyes suddenly brightened. Sister Shuixian, is this your friend? A female disciple who seemed to know Xiao Shuixian came forward and greeted her. She smiled gently, but her beautiful eyes couldn't help but look at Musian's eyes. Even if he deliberately restrained the natural charm of the nine-tailed fox, Musian would still involuntarily attract the attention and favor of women. Xiao Shuixian frowned inadvertently, but still maintained a polite smile. Well, he is the person invited by His Majesty. Your Majesty. The female disciple's eyes suddenly lit up, but before she could speak, a maid came from a distance, glanced at the people present, and whispered, Mr. Mu, His Majesty invites you. The princess glanced at Musian inconspicuously, and her beautiful face under the veil showed a playful smile. Musian had just arrived, and Luo Tan had already noticed it. The reaction was really fast. When Musian and others came to the distant viewing platform, they found that there was not even a shadow of a person nearby. It seemed that there was an invisible formation covering the entire viewing platform. You can't see the situation inside the viewing platform when you are outside, but you can see what the scene outside is like from the viewing platform. This formation is really magical. Musian looked around, and when he saw the outside world through the viewing platform, he couldn't help but exclaimed. This is a fourth-grade formation. Through this formation, we can prevent the outside world from spying on everything here, Xiao Shuixian explained from the side. After she finished speaking, she quickly remembered something and hesitated. I forgot to ask just now, who is the woman next to Master Mu? The Princess of Yunzhou, Musian explained. Your Highness Princess. Xiao Shuixian's eyes widened slightly, a little surprised. She had heard of this name. This woman was a close friend of His Majesty. When she was serving in front of the Emperor, she heard His Majesty say that this princess had saved His Majesty's life in the past. Unexpectedly, this princess also came to Zunyun Academy, and came with Musian. Is Shuixian here too? At this moment, a woman's calm and pleasant voice came from not far away. Musian looked up and saw the noble queen of Yizhou. Her long hair was loose, and she wore a luxurious decoration on her head. The gold tassels swayed gently. A pair of snow-white boots embroidered with gold edges wrapped her delicate and fair legs. The boots tapped the floor lightly, which made the Empress's elegant temperament even more noble. She leaned on the chair, her eyes stayed on Musian for a moment, and then looked at Xiao Shuixian. "Your Majesty." Xiao Shuixian bowed respectfully. Luo Tan glanced at the little beauty in front of him, smiled and nodded. "Well, it seems that you are only one step away from the 6th grade alchemist, not bad. These are all the results of your Majesty's past guidance." Shuixian has always kept it in mind and never dared to forget. Xiao Shuixian replied respectfully. Luo Tan smiled and nodded gently. "If I remember correctly, you seem to be responsible for many matters of the inner courtyard disciples today? I'm here, you go and get busy first." Xiao Shuixian glanced at Musian hesitantly. "Don't worry, I'm here, don't worry about Master Mu." Luo Tan's left leg was over her right leg, and as her skirt fluttered, it seemed that a touch of white skin on her thigh could be seen between her boots and the hem of her skirt. "That's true, with His Majesty here, even if there are foreign apostles in the academy, they dare not act rashly, and there is really no need to worry." Xiao Shuixian smiled and said, "Since His Majesty has important things to discuss with Master Mu, Shuixian will take her leave first." Luo Tan smiled and watched Xiao Shuixian's figure disappear from the viewing platform, and then his eyes fell on Musian. "Why are you so far away from me? Are you afraid that I will eat you?" Luo Tan chuckled with a bit of a teasing tone. "That's not the case, I was just thinking about something just now." Musian walked to Luo Tan's side and sat down generously. "What are you thinking? If you have anything to say, just say it directly. There is a formation I set up here. People from the outside world cannot enter. Similarly, they cannot see the scene in the viewing platform." Luo Tan smiled. Musian smiled but did not say anything. He thought that people from the outside world could not see it, but it seemed that they could hear the sound, right? "By the way, does she mean that this place is safe and no one will come near? And could the underlying meaning be, that new CGS can be unlocked here?" Musian suddenly realized that there seemed to be something in Luo Tan's words just now, and couldn't help but secretly take a look at the Empress beside him. "Actually, I originally wanted to take you to Zunyun Academy with me, but considering that you might not like these fights, I came by myself." Luo Tan glanced at the young man tenderly and continued. "Sorry, I should have told you first." Hearing this, Musian couldn't help but sigh. "Although I'm really not interested in joining in the fun, Your Majesty should really say something, or it would be nice if you brought me to the academy." Luo Tan raised her eyebrows slightly and said unexpectedly, "What? Are you interested in the fight between my Yuzhou monk and the foreign apostle? Or do you want to come to the academy to meet your little lover?" When she spoke to the end, there was a bit of ridicule in her tone. Obviously she could see Xiao Shuixian's thoughts about Musian. "I'm not very interested in the fighting here, it's just..." Musian gave Luo Tan a complicated look and whispered, "During the time when Your Majesty came to the academy, some things happened in the palace." The originally indifferent smile on Luo Tan's face finally faded a bit, and he hesitated. "What do you mean?" Musian was about to speak when a woman's gentle and melodious voice suddenly came from the distance, interrupting the conversation between the two. "Luo Tan, there are so many empty seats here, you shouldn't mind having one more person sit there." Luo Tan looked up and met the gentle and beautiful eyes of this mature wife. She immediately showed a charming smile. "Of course I don't mind, but I didn't expect you to come to the academy to join in the fun. It's really rare." The princess moved lightly, walked to Musian and sat down next to her. She smiled gently. "When I went out tonight, I happened to meet Mr. Mu, so I came with him to have a look. Anyway, there is nothing to do in Yuzhou." "Do?" Luo Tan nodded slightly. "No wonder you are with him tonight. Did we meet him by chance on the road?" Just as he was thinking about this, the voice of a maid outside the viewing platform sounded in Luo Tan's ears. "Your Majesty, the Dean of the Inner Courtyard wants to see you. It seems there is something important." "Here we go again, Luo Tan's beautiful eyebrows couldn't help but frown slightly, a little displeased at being disturbed. In the past, whenever Luo Tan came to Zunyun Academy, the female dean who was a mad alchemist would ask her about alchemy. Unexpectedly, she had just arrived at the academy tonight, and the other party already knew about her arrival. Then you all sit here for a while, and I will come back after I finish handling the matters there. After Luo Tan finished speaking, he walked out of the viewing platform and disappeared from Musian's sight. Musian admired the scenery outside the viewing platform, then casually glanced at the beautiful wife and said, "Were you trying to stop me just now? Didn't you want her to know about this? The matter between you and me is a misunderstanding. If you tell Luo Tan, it will only cause trouble and even cause unnecessary misunderstandings and gaps between me and her." This time she pretended to be Luo Tan. This matter could not be explained clearly. If Luo Tan knew about it, she would probably think that it was her side who pretended to be her to deceive Musian when she was not in the palace. "Make out with him." The princess paused and continued in a soft tone, "Instead of doing this, it is better to keep this matter as a secret between you and me." When she said this, she said with some emotion, "It's just that I didn't expect, she chose you because she wanted to be born in the furnace. It's not just for the natural cauldron." Musian smiled, "Your Majesty and I have a good rapport." She has said this in the past. Since Her Royal Highness the Princess knows her so well, she should also know that she will not just choose anyone as a Taoist companion. Although Heavenly Court's spiritual energy is several times richer than Zhu's spiritual energy, it is not enough to help her ascend. "I guess she is indeed interested in your other advantages," the princess said calmly. Hearing this, Musian couldn't help but ask, "You just felt a trace of heavenly aura before and concluded that I couldn't help her ascend?" "I am the princess of Dao Dao. I naturally know whether the spiritual energy of heaven can help her ascend," the princess said softly. Musian shook his head and smiled, "If you felt the stronger heavenly aura, maybe you wouldn't say that." The princess was startled, as if she was recalling what happened in the palace just now. Her pretty face quickly passed by a wisp of red clouds. She glanced at Musian, and said softly, "Do you dare?" Her beautiful eyes were still gentle, but there was a hint of warning in her tone, or pressure. Although Emperor Dapen said that he and I are not actually married, in the eyes of outsiders we are husband and wife. If he gets knowing this, even if Emperor Qing protects you, he will probably ask for an explanation. Musian was startled, "But when we were in the palace today, it was you who first disguised yourself as His Majesty and caused that misunderstanding, right?" The princess chuckled lightly and said lightly, "If I am willing, even the black can be said to be white." Musian was immediately silenced. He didn't expect that a powerful person like Dang Dang Hedeo would resort to such small tricks. The princess raised her lips, but her tone was still gentle and admonishing, "You'd better hide what happened between you and me tonight. It will indeed be a bit troublesome for me if Luo Tan knows about it. But if Emperor Dapen knows about this, I'm afraid you will also be in a lot of trouble. You don't want to be worried about by a powerful Hedeo power in the future, right?" Looking at the silent boy, the smile on the princess's face became more and more charming. Her eyes were extremely gentle, but her eyes were condescending. After all, it was a little monk who wanted to play such petty tricks with her, but he was still a little bit behind. The princess was about to open her mouth again to end this conversation and settle the matter completely. But at this moment, Musian suddenly reached out and grabbed the beautiful wife's soft little hand. The princess' delicate body trembled, and she almost subconsciously wanted to take out her hand. At this moment, the gentle voice of the young man came from beside her. "Your Royal Highness, you don't want His Majesty Luo Tan to find out what happened tonight, right? This is a big chapter with close to 7,000 words, full of sincerity. I am asking for votes and blades at the end of the month. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 508. On the viewing platform, the princess just let Musian grab her hand, looking a little stunned. I think even she would not have thought that a little cultivator who had just entered the Return to Void realm would dare to threaten her. After an unknown amount of time, the princess suddenly woke up, pulled back her hand, and glared at Musian. How dare you threaten me? Musian shrugged, it's just a courtesy. Your Highness, have you forgotten how you threatened me just now? The princess was speechless for a moment. After all, if you hadn't concealed your identity and disguised yourself as His Majesty Logotan, I wouldn't have caused misunderstandings. Musian continued. The princess opened her rosy little mouth slightly, and wanted to say something, but the words were stuck in her throat and she couldn't say anything. Indeed, in the bedroom before, she wanted to trick Musian's secret, so she disguised herself as Logotan. Originally, Musian simply wanted to be intimate with Logotan, and had no idea that the fiancé of the Great Pen Emperor had turned into Logotan. In fact, even if you tell His Majesty Logotan, I don't think she will say anything, Musian suddenly said. The princess glanced at Musian. You mean, she found out that her man was intimate with the person she trusted the most, but she wouldn't say anything. She chuckled, maybe it's just as you said, but I don't want to bet. As for what happened between you and me tonight, let's stop here. It's just that I have something to ask Mr. Mew. When the beautiful woman said this, she stared at Musian calmly, and her gentle eyes in the past were rippling with a moist luster. Please tell me, Your Highness, I will tell you everything I know. Musian smiled. You are indeed a natural furnace, right? Asked the princess. Hasn't Your Highness felt this tonight? Musian asked back. Even though she was covered with a veil, one could still see a blush of shyness on the pretty face of the princess. She glared at Musian and said, Mr. Mew, don't mention this matter in front of outsiders in the future, it's not good for you or me. Or is Mr. Mew teasing me on purpose? Musian was stunned. If I must say, wasn't it Her Royal Highness the Princess who teased me first tonight? At first, I thought the person in the bedroom was Logotan. When Musian said this, his eyes dimmed slightly. My innocence was ruined by Her Royal Highness the Princess, and now I have to be slandered by you. Well, after all, you are in a high position and have great power, so I will swallow this anger. The princess glanced at this frivolous guy and said, it's obviously you who took advantage. Why do you think it's all my fault? Musian's expression remained unchanged. Looking at the foreign apostles and the elders of the academy who had already come on stage and were about to fight, he casually threw out a seemingly insignificant topic. Does Your Highness think that men and women should be equal in this world? The gentle and dignified princess nodded without thinking, of course. Musian smiled and said, then why do you think that I mistook you for Logotan tonight and kissed you, and that I took advantage, not you? After a long silence, the princess glanced at Musian dimly and snorted, it's a farce. Musian smiled, but did not continue to tease him. First of all, the fiancée of the Great Pen Emperor is at the Hedeo realm. Although she has a gentle personality, if she is really annoyed and gets angry, it will not end well. Secondly, because of Miss Linglong's matter, he might need help from the princess in the future. Musian said, tonight's matter will be as the princess wishes, so let's stop here. If you need any help in the future, Mew will do his best, please believe my sincerity. Musian's words were full of sincerity. If Musian said this before tonight, the princess would only be disdainful and think that Musian was overestimating his abilities. Because in her eyes, Musian is just a child, at most he is prettier, has some talent, and has been able to return to the void earlier than his peers, but that's all. But now, her body is still flowing with the spiritual energy brought by Musian. Even between her lips and teeth, it seems that she can still feel the beauty brought by the spiritual energy of the heaven. That kind of intoxicating fragrance is incomparable to any mellow wine in the world. Moreover, he understands the 4 words modest and low-key. The secret of the Tiansheng furnace, if she hadn't disguised herself as Luo Tan tonight, she probably wouldn't have known that Musian had such a big secret. The Tiansheng furnace is full of spiritual energy from the heaven. If this matter were to spread, even with the protection of Fairy Yao Meng, Musian would become the object of pursuit by female cultivators. Feeling Musian's sincerity, the princess couldn't help but be slightly moved, and said in a pleasant voice, "Why are you willing to help me?" "It's very simple, you are a friend trusted by His Majesty Luo Tan, and today Dapen Emperor wanted to put pressure on me, and it was you who protected me at that time." Musian showed a gentle smile. "Today's incident was caused by me, and I will naturally protect you." The princess shook her head. "Maybe it's a piece of cake for Her Royal Highness, but Mu has always remembered the kindness today," Musian said sincerely. He paused and hesitated, "But Emperor Dapen is your fiancé after all. You must not conflict with him because of my affairs, that would be bad. After all, he is also the Lord of Yunzhou. And its power is huge." The princess said calmly, "No matter how strong he is, he can't really be my enemy. You don't have to worry about my affairs." Musian was stunned and looked at the princess subconsciously. "What's wrong?" Seemingly uncomfortable being stared at, the princess couldn't help but look sideways and asked. Musian came back to his senses and said softly, "It's okay, I just feel that Her Royal Highness treats me very well." Although she had met many men in the past, this was obviously the first time she had met a man as charming as Musian. Coupled with the ambiguity between the two tonight, for some reason, the princess's heart beat involuntarily faster. Her gentle and beautiful eyes stayed on Musian for a long time, and then she came back to her senses. "Anyway, just remember not to leak what happened tonight, and it will benefit you in the future. Mu should keep this in mind." Musian quickly lowered his head, maintaining the posture that a junior should have. The chat between the two ended here, and at this moment, there was a wave of spiritual energy not far away. Musian looked up and saw that on the white jade platform on the north side, an old man's palm turned into a ray of light, and he was killing the foreign apostles on the other side of the platform with great momentum. After the rewriting of the rules of heaven and earth, some monks who were stuck in the bottleneck period in the past have reached the threshold of enlightenment. In the past, it was difficult to improve the level of returning to the void no matter how hard they practiced, and it is much easier than before. There was a hint of sigh in the princess's tone, and she said softly, "I just don't know how many monks who have returned to the void realm will die in the heavenly tribulation of enlightenment this time." Musian thought slightly and asked, "His Royal Highness, have you ever witnessed the rewriting of the rules of heaven and earth in the past?" The princess nodded. "Every few thousand years, the rules of heaven and earth may change. This time you just happened to catch up with the golden age, and with Luo Tan here, as long as the Juding refining void pill can be successfully refined, it may not be necessary to achieve enlightenment." "How long has it been?" Musian took over. "The prerequisite is to obtain the medicinal materials for refining the Sudan, especially Yunyanlu from Yunzhou." The princess glanced at Musian, as if she had read his thoughts, and said calmly, "Don't worry, after I return to Yunzhou in 2 days, I will help you find Yunyanliu." "Then I would like to thank your highness the princess in advance." Musian raised his hand and bowed. After the two sat in front of the viewing platform for a while, the fight between the alien apostle and the academy elder in the distance seemed to be coming to an end. As Luo Tan expected from the beginning, the elders who can teach students in this academy must be quite powerful. "That elder seems to have won," Musian said softly. The princess nodded, and then her eyes fell on Luo Tan, who had returned to the high platform at some point. "Luo Tan will take care of the rest. I plan to go back to the palace first." "Do you want to wait for her or come with me?" she asked. Why do these words have the feeling of "you choose her or me," Musian recalled for no reason that Ruoxi and the others asked him to make a similar choice when the Shura field broke out before. I'm a little tired tonight. Since Her Royal Highness the Princess doesn't mind, let's go together, Musian said with a smile. But before that, it would be best to talk to her, he added. The princess nodded lightly, looked at Musian who was about to leave the viewing platform, and suddenly hesitated and said, by the way, I still need a few of the small returning pills you refined. Can Mr. Mu refine it again after he returns this time? Make some. You mean the Xiao Huan Dan infused with some heavenly spiritual energy? Musian asked. The princess nodded slightly. This is a favor that I owe you. If you have anything you want in the future, please tell me and I will return this favor to you. Sister, I don't want to struggle anymore and I don't know if it will work, Musian cursed in his heart and said, after I go back and refine the small return pill, I will send it to you. Amidst the bumps along the way, Musian returned to the palace. Zunyun Academy is close to the palace, so the return trip didn't take long. Musian returned to Biwen where he lived. He spent nearly an hour refining a batch of Xiaohuan Dan and put it into a jade bottle, and then left Biwen. This thing is not very difficult to refine for Musian. He had chosen Xiaohuan Dan as the elixir infused with heavenly aura purely because Musian's alchemy skills could only barely refine second-grade elixirs. Not long after, he brought a jade bottle containing a large amount of second-grade Xiaohuan Dan, spoke to the maid outside the princess's guest room, and waited for news from the maid at the door. After a while, a pretty maid came over and announced, Mr. Mu, the princess invites you. Musian then walked into the villa, and saw the gorgeous princess in the elegantly decorated front hall. She put on a loose dress, her hair was simply pulled up, and her eyebrows were like black. The painting has plump red lips. Although the veil covers the beauty of the prosperous age, it cannot hide the special charm of a mature woman. Although I have never seen her appearance, this woman has a really good figure. No wonder Emperor Daipen is so obsessed with her. Musian looked away and handed the jade bottle forward. According to the agreement, this is the small rejuvenation elixir that Her Royal Highness needs. The princess raised her eyes slightly and said calmly, what I want is not a small return pill. Musian smiled and said, I know that there is heavenly spiritual energy in this small Huandan, although it is not much. Anyway, what does the princess want this small Huandan for? In theory, even if all the small Huandan he made were refined, the heavenly spiritual energy would not be able to give the princess much benefit. Mr. Mu, don't worry about this matter. I have my own use. The princess said softly, Mr. Mu must be tired after traveling today. I won't keep you here. I just got the things and drove me away, bad woman. Musian stammered a few times, and had to raise his hand and bow helplessly, saying, then I will take my leave first. After the door was closed, the princess's spiritual consciousness took the entire huge villa into her eyes at that moment. After observing for a while, she restrained her spiritual consciousness. Then, she poured out a pill from the jade bottle, hesitated for a moment, and put it into her rosy little mouth. For a moment, her delicate body could not help but tremble slightly, and her eyes were dazed. The spiritual energy in this pill was indeed the same as the spiritual energy of the heaven that Musian gave her tonight. No. The spiritual energy he gave tonight was much richer than the spiritual energy of the heaven in the Xiaohuan Dan. After all, the spiritual energy given by dual cultivation is the most concentrated in this world. Just as I expected, the spiritual energy of the heaven cannot make the great power of Hideo ascend to heaven, at least this spiritual energy is far from enough. The princess whispered to herself. But if the spiritual energy of the heaven in the Tiansheng furnace is completely absorbed, or, after absorbing it, wait until the spiritual energy in the Tiansheng furnace is restored, and then absorb it 2 or 3 times in succession, what will happen in the long run? Such a ridiculous idea suddenly popped up in the princess' mind. Then, she woke up in a trance, shook her head quickly, and threw the ridiculous idea behind her. But for some reason, she quietly clenched the Xiao Huan Dan in her hand. The next day, after Luo Tan returned to the palace last night, he did not summon Muzian again, as if he had other government affairs to deal with. In the evening of that day, when Muzian was studying the art of alchemy in the other garden, he received a message from Luo Tan. Muzian followed him into the palace, and soon he saw the empress who was in charge of Yuzhou in the luxuriously decorated bedroom. She was wearing a snow-white dress with gold thread, a gorgeous hairpin on her head, and tassels made of rare pearls, which made her flawless face even more beautiful. Luo Tan was sitting in front of the bedroom, holding his brow with his hand, his plump and slender legs wrapped in snow-white jade boots, stepping on the luxurious soft lichen, and seemed to be thinking about something. "Should I come later? Your Majesty seems to be troubled by something," Muzian said. Luo Tan glanced at him and smiled. "It's because I have something bothering me that I want to see you. After all, no matter how big the trouble is, as long as you are by my side, it actually doesn't matter." Muzian was stunned, thinking that he didn't expect that this empress actually knew how to tease men. "By the way, what did you want to tell me yesterday in the academy?" Luo Tan suddenly said. Muzian was silent for a moment, shook his head and smiled. "Nothing." However, before he finished speaking, Luo Tan's crisp and pleasant voice sounded, "Does she already know that you are a natural furnace tripod?" Muzian was a little surprised, staring at Luo Tan, and said nothing. "Don't be so surprised, the princess is a creature loved by the great Dao, born to be a person favored by heaven, so it's only a matter of time for her to find out that you are a natural furnace tripod." The noble and elegant cold empress changed her beautiful legs in black silk and raised them, with a faint smile in her beautiful eyes. "How did she find out?" "When you left yesterday, I had a little misunderstanding with her," Muzian said tactfully. Luo Tan was stunned for a moment, then, as if she had thought of something, she suddenly opened her eyes wide and stared at Muzian. "If I remember correctly, I asked you to come to the bedroom to see me last night. The princess should not have been in contact with you for a long time. How did she find out about your natural furnace? Or, did she come to the bedroom to find me last night?" When Luo Tan asked again, Muzian did not answer for a long time. Luo Tan already understood in her heart, and a complex expression appeared on her beautiful and cold face. "What happened between you and her?" Her voice was subconsciously lowered a few points. Although she had guessed in her heart, she was still shocked and difficult to accept when she heard the answer from Muzian. "No, it was just that some unnecessary misunderstandings occurred when I was talking to the princess in the bedroom last night, so she noticed the natural furnace." Muzian shook his head. "No wonder she seemed to be much closer to you when we were in the academy last night." At this moment, Luo Tan finally understood in her heart. Zunyun Academy won a great victory yesterday. Why does His Majesty look so sad today? Muzian changed the subject. Hearing this, Luo Tan rubbed his brows and sighed. Zunyun Academy sends several top-ranked disciples to the palace every few years. Calculating the time, it seems that this day is coming soon. Muzian doubtfully said, "What's there to worry about? It's just that there is no worry about selecting disciples, but I have to consider the balance between civilians and nobles, and in addition, I have to take care of the feelings of important officials in the court." Muzian didn't understand these things, so it was difficult for him to give advice. He just couldn't help but sigh in his heart. Although he was a great man of the Hedao, he had to deal with such tedious things. It was really hard. Luo Tan leaned gently in Muzian's arms and said faintly, "Sometimes I wonder why I established the immortal dynasty. What benefits does it bring to me? If there was no immortal dynasty, I would probably be as relaxed as the Green Emperor now. Everyone has different ambitions. Your Majesty cares about the monks in Yuzhou and suppresses taboos. Everyone praises you, even I admire you in my heart." Muzian hugged the noble and elegant empress into his arms, feeling the warmth of the woman's delicate body. After an unknown period of silence between the two, Musian smelled the fragrance of the beauty in his arms from the snow-white dress. His original awe and admiration for Luotan gradually changed. At this moment, there seemed to be two voices in my heart. One voice said, "She is the Empress of Yuzhou. She once suppressed the taboos and founded the immortal dynasty. You should be in awe of her." And the other voice said, "I don't care, I will suppress her." The two voices fought with each other in my mind. Luotan's delicate body was completely close to Musian, and the weight seemed to be completely pressed in his arms. In the end, the second voice won. Luotan seemed to have noticed something, glanced at Musian's handsome face, and then gradually went down. After noticing something, the woman's elegant and noble eyes in the past revealed a touch of tenderness at this moment, and she whispered, "The princess will come to play chess with me later, so it's okay if it's just a little close, right?" Musian turned his head to look at her and said softly. The alchemy empress looked at him and couldn't help but ripple in her heart. Yesterday, she wanted to get close to Musian but was repeatedly blocked. Not only Musian, she also missed the aura of the boy. There was a hint of affection in her eyes, and she hummed softly, "If we are just a little closer, it should be in time." She wanted to bend down to take off the snow-white jade boots on her legs, but at this time, Musian put one hand on the back of her hand. Under Luotan's puzzled eyes, Musian said softly, "Let's just leave it like this, you are the most beautiful now." Luotan seemed to understand something, and immediately rolled his eyes, full of charm. "Before, I was wondering why you always stared at other people's legs, do you have this hobby?" Then, she put one hand on Musian's shoulder, and her elegant eyes were now full of smiles. She leaned over Musian's ear and blew softly, "Next time, I will take you to the place where I review memorials to play with you, how about it? This woman is so good at..." Dong dong. Musian's heartbeat suddenly quickened. Looking at the teasing eyes of the Empress in his arms, he could no longer suppress his inner impulse. He embraced Luotan's slender waist and lowered his head to kiss her red lips. The spiritual energy between the Tiansheng furnace cauldron and the Tiansheng furnace cauldron finally intertwined with each other at this moment. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 509. It was night, the moon was bright and the stars were sparse. The dignified and mature princess opened her eyes, as if she had noticed something, and walked out of the room with her skirt lifted. "Your Highness, do you have anything to tell me?" The sweet and respectful voice of the maid who accompanied her on this trip came from the door. The princess slightly raised her chin, and under the veil, her beautiful eyes were filled with strange colors, and she said, "Is that the direction where Luotan lives?" The maid looked up and said, "Yes, His Majesty the Medicine King usually rests in that bedroom." "Did your Highness find anything?" the maid asked. The princess blinked her beautiful eyes and stared at that direction. After an unknown period of time, she exhaled gently. Above the bedroom where Luotan lived, at this moment, it seemed that the shadow of a foxtail could be vaguely seen, charming and charming. In addition to the demonic aura in the foxtail, there was more of the sacred aura of the heavenly court. However, most cultivators could not perceive what was happening in Luotan Palace at this moment, and could not even catch the breath of the nine-tailed heavenly fox, let alone the spiritual energy of the heavenly court. But the princess was born to be connected with the great Dao, which means that her perception was amazing, which means that she had the ability to catch adultery at the maximum level. As long as Musian was still in the palace, she would be able to catch him if he lost a little bit of the spiritual energy of the heavenly court. What's more, his spiritual energy of the heavenly court was fading away rapidly at this moment. "She is really anxious." The princess raised her eyebrows slightly and could not help but mutter to herself. The 9 cauldrons refining void pill had not yet been refined. If Luotan ate that piece of cake so quickly, it would have no effect on Luotan, but it would have a significant impact on Musian. Luton was born as a furnace cauldron, and Musian was also born as a furnace cauldron. If the two of them performed a ritual of exchanging spiritual energy, after that, Musian would probably immediately comprehend the rhyme of the Tao. Ordinary natural furnaces and cauldrons naturally cannot have such exaggerated auxiliary effects, but Luotan is in the Hedeo realm, and has the body of a medicine fairy, and is born to be favored by natural materials and treasures. The benefits of practicing dual cultivation with her will be tempting even for Hedeo masters of the same realm. And if a cultivator with a lower realm than Luotan is lucky enough to be favored by her, it is not an exaggeration to say that he can be reborn directly. Under normal circumstances, when Musian just comprehends the rhyme of Tao, the probability of success is the highest. In other words, if he can wait until he refines the Juding Liang Supil and then perform the spiritual energy exchange ceremony with Luotan, Musian's success rate in the realm of enlightenment can be increased by another 10 to 20%. It is no wonder that the princess thinks Luotan is a little anxious at this moment. "What does your highness mean?" the maid asked softly. "Nothing, you can leave first, I want to go out and relax alone," the princess said. The night wind was mixed with a little chill, blowing her dress to the wind, outlining the sexy and plump curves of the wife. The princess walked along the garden of the palace, strolling along the way, but suddenly found that she had come to a palace without knowing when. Last night, she was in this bedroom, and was. However, it was purely a misunderstanding caused by her disguise as Luotan. Now that the misunderstanding has been resolved, the person with Musian is Luotan. When she thought of this, she recalled the spiritual energy of the heaven and the gentle kiss of the boy she had felt before. The princess' heart inexplicably became a little more complicated. "His Majesty has ordered that no one is allowed to enter tonight, so please go back." Just as she was about to enter the bedroom, a guard's respectful voice came from the door of the palace, stopping the princess outside. The princess raised her eyebrows slightly. "Didn't she tell you that I don't need to be stopped from going anywhere I want?" The guard showed an embarrassed look and said, "Her Majesty did say that, but she also said that no one can enter tonight." The princess nodded. "Well, then I won't disturb her tonight." She paused and continued, "Just pretend that I haven't been here tonight, understand?" Although her beautiful eyes were still gentle, her words seemed to reveal a bit of majesty that could not be disobeyed. The guard's heart trembled and said, "Yes." The princess turned and left the bedroom. Then in the next moment, the figure disappeared from the guard's sight like a ghost. Not long after, the woman appeared in the bedroom. The princess was a gentle woman and would not make things difficult for a guard. After all, the other party had his own difficulties. But there was no place she couldn't go. The bedroom was quiet, and no sound could be heard. At this time in the past, servants should be seen in the bedroom, but tonight there was not a single person. At this time, the princess seemed to hear a sweet and seductive voice in her ear. She followed the direction of the voice, shielded her own breath and approached the bedroom door in front of her. For some reason, although she was not the person involved, the princess felt her heartbeat speed up involuntarily. She subconsciously held her breath and looked through the crack in the door. "Your Majesty, according to what you said just now, as long as the mind is focused enough, even an alchemist close to the 3rd grade can make a 3rd grade to 4th grade pill," Musian's voice came from inside the house. The princess was stunned for a moment because she did not see the scene she imagined. Because at this moment, Musian was sitting on a square table, holding a book on elixirs in his hand and asking Luotan for advice. And the Empress was sitting opposite Musian, teaching him carefully. They were not, but simply talking about alchemy. But if so, what was the matter with the rich spiritual energy above the bedroom just now? At this moment, countless question marks seemed to appear on the head of the princess, and the charming face under the veil was full of incredible. Obviously, the spiritual energy of the natural furnace was filling the entire bedroom, and it seemed that the shadows of 9 foxtails were quietly blooming in the room, as if there was infinite charm. but they didn't seem to be doing some intimate actions. What was going on? The princess looked at this harmonious scene in the room, her eyes flickered slightly, and she was a little confused for a while. The spiritual energy of the heavenly court was filled between heaven and earth. The spiritual energy of the heavenly court was countless times richer than the small pill refined by Musian. If she could completely absorb the spiritual energy of the heavenly palace, she might be able to reach the threshold of the realm of Yahweh. The princess couldn't help but have this absurd thought in her mind. At this time, Luotan in the room seemed to have noticed something strange outside the door. Her hair was lazily scattered, and she raised her eyes and stared casually. The two besties stared at each other. Luotan's eyes were filled with a hint of surprise. Soon, she smiled and said, "Why didn't you let anyone know when you came? It just so happens that my discussion with him is almost over. Come in and tell me what you want to say." The princess collected her thoughts and her voice was gentle and pleasant. "Since Mr. Mew is here tonight, I'll come to bother you tomorrow. I originally came to see you tonight just to play a game of chess with you." "Okay, then I'll find you tomorrow." Luotan smiled slightly. After taking a last look at Musian, the princess turned and left the bedroom. The original entanglement in her heart finally disappeared at this moment. Originally, she came to the bedroom tonight just to simply want to know whether her best friend was going to be intimate with Musian, the natural furnace cauldron, tonight, but the scene in the room at this moment has proved that she was just worrying too much. However, if the princess could completely open the door of the bedroom at this moment, she would actually be able to see a completely different scene. For example, the alchemy empress sitting opposite Musian. At this moment, a snow-white jade boot under the table was resting on Musian's leg as if nothing had happened. Even Musian, who had experienced many ups and downs, was almost shocked by Luotan's operation. He didn't speak just now, not because he didn't say anything, but because he was winking at Luotan. However, Luotan just held his fragrant cheek with his hand, staring at Musian with charming eyes, explaining the key points of alchemy to Musian in an elegant and indifferent tone, rubbing the jade boots on his legs, and at the same time, chatting with his bestie in a relaxed manner. He even planned to invite her in to play chess with him. It was not until this moment that Musian understood why the Hedeo realm was the Hedeo realm. This mentality was not something that ordinary people could have. "Aren't you worried that she would really come in?" After hearing the footsteps gradually disappear, Musian looked at Luotan, who was sitting opposite him, and said helplessly, "I'm not worried. What are you worried about?" Luotan smiled brightly, playing with a strand of hair, and said calmly, "Besides, nothing happened between you and me tonight. Even if she came in, she wouldn't say anything." Musian thought that it would be fine for the princess to come in, but as soon as she entered the room, "She saw you stepping on the Lord of Heaven. Wouldn't I die on the spot in the future?" Fortunately, the results were all good. "The princess shouldn't come again later. Don't you plan to sit for a while?" Luotan looked at Musian, who had already stood up and was about to leave, and couldn't help asking softly, "According to what you said just now, we need to wait until the Judingliangsu is refined before conducting the spiritual energy exchange ceremony, so that I can maximize the benefits. Then why am I still staying here?" Musian asked lazily. Luotan tilted his head slightly, his tone elegant and charming. "As you said before, there is more than one way to exchange spiritual energy, right?" She took off one of the snow-white jade boots, and the skin color of her tender white feet seemed to be faintly revealed. She held her cheek with her hand and looked at Musian with a smile. "Of course, if you want to go back and concentrate on practicing, I can't stop you. What do you want to choose?" In a blink of an eye, 3 days passed unknowingly. In the past 3 days, in addition to going to the bedroom to ask Luotan for alchemy every night, Musian spent more time practicing in his own villa. At this time, in a courtyard of the palace, Luotan was sitting under the pavilion sipping tea and twisting a chess piece in his hand. The sexy princess sat opposite her, her beautiful eyes quietly staring at the chessboard, as if thinking about the chess game. Given the character of the great Pen Emperor, I'm afraid he will come to you in less than 7 days. How do you plan to answer him then? The princess suddenly asked an irrelevant question. The all things transformation cauldron is a sacred object of Yuzhou. No one can take it out of Yuzhou. I will naturally answer him truthfully. As for offending the great Pen Emperor, it doesn't matter. After all, he probably knows that it is unrealistic to borrow the all things transformation cauldron, so he didn't have any expectations at the beginning. Luo Tan dropped a white piece, took the black pieces that were surrounded by it aside, and looked at the princess with a smile. But don't you want to persuade me on his behalf? If you are the one who speaks up, I will seriously consider it. The princess shook her head slowly. Let's not talk about whether the great Pen Emperor can really refine immortal medicine by borrowing the all things transformation cauldron. Even if he can, it has nothing to do with me. She paused and asked casually, if Musian asks you to borrow the cauldron, will you lend it to him? No, Luo Tan answered very straightforwardly. But I will help him refine the medicine, she continued to add. Because he is your underground lover, the princess emphasized the word lover. Luo Tan smiled but said nothing. The Green Emperor may be back in a day or two. You have to restrain yourself when that time comes, the princess did not forget to remind her best friend. It's okay to secretly get intimate with the Taoist partner of the Green Emperor, but at least you should know how to restrain yourself. You should know how to wipe your mouth even if you eat cake secretly. Musian has been in Luo Tan's bedroom almost every night these 2 days. Although she didn't see it with her own eyes, she didn't believe that the two of them were just chatting and playing chess. Don't worry, I know my limits. Besides, the Green Emperor went to the southern wilderness this time for the medicinal materials for the Juding refining void pill. When the time comes, I will need to refine this pill. Luo Tan chuckled and saw the maid walking into the courtyard and asked, is Musian here? The maid nodded slightly. Your Majesty, do you want to invite Master Mu in? Let him in, I just have something to say to him, Luo Tan said. Seeing this, the princess put down the chess piece in her hand and was about to leave the courtyard. If you don't mind, you can stay too, at least finish the game between you and me, Luo Tan said with a smile. After all, you will be going back in a day or two, right? The rulers of Yunzhou are the princess and the great Pen Emperor. Although they have the means of clones, it is more convenient to have the real body in case of emergencies. You and Musian may have something to talk about. Am I not here just to make things difficult for you? The princess rolled her eyes at Luo Tan. She is indeed a beauty. Even such a look is very charming. I don't mind, and I think he won't mind either. Luo Tan looked up at the young man who walked into the courtyard and smiled. Right, Musian. This is Yuzhou after all. If His Majesty doesn't mind, how could I mind? In front of the courtyard in the distance, Musian was walking in with a maid, showing a bright smile. Besides, His Majesty trusts Her Royal Highness the Princess so much, so I naturally trust her too. There was a hint of shyness in the gentle eyes of the princess, but her tone remained gentle and calm as usual. After all, I am a cultivator from Yunzhou. The Green Emperor has always been at odds with Yunzhou. Aren't you worried that she will be angry when she knows it? Musian walked to the front of the courtyard and sat opposite her at Luo Tan's signal. He smiled and said, it doesn't matter. Sister Green Emperor knows right from wrong. Even if she knows what I said today, she won't be angry. Maybe she will be very relieved. The princess glanced at Musian, but didn't say anything this time. She wanted to say that if your sister Kingdi knew that we were intimate together one night in the palace last time, she would probably not be relieved, right? But considering that Luo Tan was also here, and because of her own shame, she finally held back. The three chatted for a while under the pavilion. Musian sat aside and watched the two people playing chess. From time to time, he pointed at the princess. causing the woman to roll her eyes speechlessly. At this moment, a certain space in the courtyard suddenly twisted. Luo Tan did not raise his eyelids and smiled lightly. It seems that although you and him are not husband and wife, you really know De Pengguang well. In the twisted space, it seemed that a huge figure of a man was faintly seen descending. The princess twisted the black seed in one hand and said lazily, "After getting a fairy medicine, ordinary cultivators will try every means to refine it into a fairy medicine, not to mention De Pengguang, who has been pursuing immortality all his life." Accompanied by a man's hearty laughter, a man in black and gold armor walked out of the space crack and said, "What a coincidence, I didn't expect that my beloved concubine and medicine emperor were both here today." De Pengguang walked in the quiet courtyard, his eyes swept from Luo Tan and his beloved concubine one by one, and then his eyes suddenly solidified on Musian, and his brows could not help but frown. Why is this little cultivator here? Thinking about it, but he has important things to do today, and he doesn't want to pay attention to Musian. He looked at Luo Tan and said, "Medicine Emperor, can you talk to me for a moment?" Luo Tan and the princess looked at each other inconspicuously, and everything seemed to be self-evident. It seems that De Pengguang came today for the matter of the all things transformation cauldron. Then please ask Emperor De Pen to go with the attendants to Daoka Palace to discuss business. Luo Tan smiled slightly and looked at the princess. "Let's finish this game of chess when we come back." After that, she stepped on her snow-white boots, took a step, and disappeared in the courtyard. Emperor De Pen nodded and said, "My beloved concubine, after I come back, you and I will go back to Yunzhou together today." The princess smiled gently, "I want to stay for 2 more days, you don't have to wait for me, please go back first when the time comes." Emperor De Pen couldn't help but frowned. This fiancé didn't give him face in front of outsiders, which naturally made him feel a little unhappy. "Okay, but my beloved concubine, be careful, don't be deceived by some people." He snorted coldly and glanced at Musian with sharp eyes, looking down on him as if he was looking at an ant. After this glance, De Pen Emperor turned around and followed the attendants and Luo Tan out of the courtyard to discuss business. And De Pen Emperor's casual glance came like a tsunami, as if to suppress people's spiritual consciousness to collapse. He was not worried that Musian would complain to King Di afterwards. If he had to complain to King Di for such a small matter and asked her to come forward, how would King Di look at his Taoist partner? Also, is there any evidence to prove that he attacked Musian today? Nothing can be proved. He just wanted to give this little cultivator a warning and lesson. Musian raised his eyelids slightly, his eyes were deep and calm, and he did not resist at all, but let the pressure brought by that look attack him. Boom! The casual glance of the great master of Hedao made Musian's body tremble slightly, as if his spirit platform almost collapsed. He subconsciously grabbed the princess's arm, and the woman frowned slightly, wanting to scold him. But when she saw Musian's pale face, she immediately realized something, her face changed slightly, and she immediately raised her hand to cast a barrier, isolating everything from the outside world. The mature and sexy beauty sat under the pavilion, her beautiful eyes were gentle, and her temperament was even more charming like a married woman, but at this moment, she was angry deep in her eyes. The great Peng Emperor dared to put pressure on Musian in front of her. Did he not take her seriously at all? "Why didn't you tell me just now?" asked the princess. Musian raised his eyes slightly, glanced at the gorgeous beauty, and forced a smile. "I'm fine, it's all my fault. I should have left when I saw De Pen Emperor just now. I shouldn't have been so close to you, which caused De Pen Emperor to misunderstand." The princess' eyes flickered. Although this child occasionally acted out of character, at least he knew how to consider the overall situation and others. He didn't take advantage of the Qing Emperor's favor to be arrogant. This alone was much better than his peers. Usually, if you have a Taoist partner in the Yehua realm, you won't be arrogant, but at least you will be a little arrogant. But you can't see any such arrogance in Musian. Instead, he always considers others. You are good in every way except that you are too kind. You have been threatened by the great Pen Emperor to this point, and you still want to speak for him. Let alone what will happen if the Green Emperor comes back and knows about this, not to mention that you are also someone I protect, and he didn't take my thoughts into consideration at all. The princess frowned slightly, thinking that Musian's character was too gentle. Musian smiled helplessly. The great Pen Emperor is busy with all kinds of things, so it is inevitable that he is more anxious. It is understandable that he would attack the younger generation, and if you have a conflict with the great Pen Emperor because of Mu's affairs, then Mu will feel guilty. For the sake of Yunzhou, please don't blame him. It's not that he is succumbing to the great Pen Emperor, but that he is considering Yunzhou and her. The princess was slightly moved when she heard this, and her tone became much gentler. Next time you encounter such a thing, don't bear it alone, at least let me know. Musian was stunned, raised his head, and looked at the princess's face. What's wrong? The princess seemed a little uncomfortable being stared at, and she subconsciously turned her eyes away. Nothing, I just think that sister princess is really good to me. Musian smiled gently, and subconsciously held the delicate hand of the mature and beautiful wife. The beautiful face of the princess under the veil was stained with a touch of red. Her beautiful eyes were dazed at first, and then she woke up quickly and subconsciously withdrew her hand. Mr. Mu, please respect yourself. Musian was stunned, and smiled bitterly helplessly. Sorry, I was rude just now. Sister protected me before, and I felt very safe staying with sister, so I accidentally. He paused, held the princess's slender jade-like hand tightly, and whispered, I'm sorry. This time, the princess rarely scolded again. Pen Emperor is her fiancé after all. Since it is her fiancé's fault, it seems that she should comfort Musian. It seems that it is not a bad idea. What's wrong? It's very impolite to keep staring at someone's face. At this time, the princess suddenly felt a pair of burning eyes staring at her, and couldn't help but ask in a low voice. Musian stared at the princess, shook his head and smiled, nothing, I just suddenly became curious about how beautiful my sister is. If I wait until the end of this trip to Yunzhou and still haven't seen my sister's appearance, it would be too regrettable. As he said, he raised his head and stared at the princess. Can I take off the veil and take a look? The princess did not say anything. After a moment of silence, Musian raised a hand and stretched it to the princess's pretty face. Then, he gently took off the veil. Today at least 10,000 words, still 4,000 short, updated in the evening. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 510. Musian took off the woman's veil, and what appeared in his field of vision was a stunning face with a charming temperament. The red lips are plump and attractive, and the eyebrows are picturesque. There is no trace of the majesty of a powerful man, but more of the sexy charm of a mature woman. Sure enough, she ranks in the top 3 among the beauties I have seen, and Sister Kingdi ranks first. However, the meditation method practiced by Sister Kingdi naturally makes people feel friendly, and has a special buff bonus, and this the princess relied solely on her figure and beauty. With such a beautiful woman, it's no wonder that Emperor Pen is so enamored of her. Musian said to himself with a bit of sigh in his heart. How long do you plan to hold hands like this, Mr. Mu? At this time, the princess suddenly said quietly and looked at Musian. This little monk was so courageous. If it were a normal person, who would dare to hold her hand like this? Even if she throws away her identity as the fiancée of Emperor Pen, she herself is in the Taoist realm. Could it be that Musian is sure that he can escape her pursuit when he attacks her like this? Only then did Musian come back to his senses, quickly let go of his hand, and said with a respectful look, I'm sorry, I was a little distracted for a moment. The princess glanced at the boy lazily with her beautiful eyes, but did not speak to reprimand him. Speaking of which, if a fairy medicine can be refined into a fairy elixir, can it really be transformed into an immortal elixir? Mucian changed the subject lightly. Don't be too anxious about everything, and know how to give up when things are good. After all, the woman in front of you is also the fiancée of Emperor Dapen. Even if they are not actually married, the relationship is still there. With this relationship, and the fact that he and the princess have not had much interaction, he cannot press forward step by step. This will easily arouse women's vigilance and boredom. The princess didn't know what Mucian was thinking at this moment. She just shook her head gently and replied, "There has never been an immortal elixir in Kyushu in the past, so I don't know either." She paused slightly when she said this, glanced at Mucian silently, and continued, "However, the aura of the elixir is very similar to the aura of heaven. If you can refine the elixir, you may really be able to use it. Maybe the huge spiritual energy will ascend. Your natural furnace seems to be more than one level higher than your own furnace. If you use your natural furnace as a medium, there may be the possibility of becoming an ascension. Before you have the ability to protect yourself, the natural furnace Ding's secret must not be exposed," the princess reminded. Mucian looked a little moved and said, "Is your highness the princess worried about my safety?" The princess glanced at him with her beautiful eyes and said calmly, "You are from Luotan after all. If something happens to you, I'm afraid she will be sad too. Is it for His Majesty's sake?" Mucian smiled helplessly, "I thought Her Royal Highness was simply worried about me." "I am not related to you, so your affairs have nothing to do with me," the princess said calmly. When she said this, she seemed to recall Mucian's ambiguous move before. Her eyes flashed with shy brilliance, she covered the veil again, her red lips parted slightly, and said, "I plan to go to Daoka Palace. Let's see how the two of them negotiate. Do you want to go with me?" Mucian smiled slightly and said, "Then Mu will be disrespectful." Daoka Palace. So, the Medicine Emperor has decided not to borrow this cauldron. In the palace, Emperor Dapen was playing with the teacup in his hand, and the expression on his face was not particularly good-looking. Luotan sat with a dignified and elegant posture, and said with a smile, "It is impossible to refine the immortal elixir even with the help of the cauldron of transformation of Qi of all things. Even I am not sure, and it is useless even if I lend you the cauldron." And Emperor Dapen might as well ask himself, if I were the one borrowing the cauldron today, and I didn't tell you exactly how to refine the immortal elixir, would you feel comfortable lending this cauldron? Emperor Dapen's expression was uncertain, but soon a warm smile appeared on his face. "What the Medicine Emperor said is true. I was the one who was rude before." He changed the topic, "The only person in the world who can refine the immortal elixir is you. Even if I borrow the cauldron, it will be of no use. Then if I want to ask the Medicine Emperor to refine the immortal elixir on my behalf, I wonder if you are interested. Of course, in return, Yunzo can accept any request made by the Emperor of Medicine." Luotan raised her eyebrows slightly and said with a faint smile, "Immortal elixirs are different from elixirs in the mortal world. The difficulty of refining is dozens of times that of 9th grade elixirs. Now I don't have much confidence. Could Emperor Dapen be at ease, give me the elixir you have worked so hard to refine." Emperor Dapen was silent for a while. Indeed, there is only this one strain of elixir, and even he had to go through a lot of hardships and go through tens of thousands of years to find just such one. If Luotan fails to refine it, the elixir will disappear completely. So I can't rush this matter. I'll give it a try after I'm sure. After all, it's an immortal elixir, and it still has value for me to refine." Hearing this, Emperor Dapen naturally found it difficult to say anything else. Luotan's hobby in alchemy is well known in Juzhu. If she can try to refine immortal elixirs, she will not miss this opportunity. After all, this is one of the keys to whether she can be promoted to an immortal alchemist. Only Since the medicine emperor is willing to help me refine the elixir, I wonder what I should give in exchange, asked the Dapen emperor. Luo Tan smiled lightly and said, I'll discuss the terms when I'm confident after this. She paused and said again in a gentle and calm tone, but I need to give you a piece of advice. Musian is my irreplaceable friend. This is the first and last warning. Dapen emperor was stunned for a moment. You actually warned me for a young cultivator you just met not long ago. He was a little surprised, even unbelievable. Yunzhou and Yuzhou have cooperated for so long, can't they be better than a Dongzhou cultivator who just met not long ago? I am also thinking about Yunzhou. Even if you don't care about offending Musian, you have to consider the princess and the entire Yunzhou. If you really offend him, it will not be good for you or Yunzhou, Luo Tan said lightly. The great Peng Emperor seemed to have heard a big joke, and laughed heartily. Does the medicine emperor mean that a cultivator who has just entered the return to void realm can threaten me, or even Yunzhou? Or does the medicine emperor think that the green emperor will offend Yunzhou for a little cultivator? The noble and elegant queen glanced at the great Peng emperor coldly with her eyes like autumn water. The green emperor values him far more than you can imagine. The great Peng emperor frowned. Even if it is as you said, I never really wanted to deal with him. I just wanted him to stay away from my beloved concubine. Luo Tan was silent for a while. You yourself have not been able to get close to your beloved concubine in the past 10,000 years in Yunzhou, but you actually think that a little cultivator who has just entered the world of immortal cultivation can get close to her? How little confidence do you have in yourself? In the past 10,000 years, the great Peng Emperor has tried his best to pursue the princess, but she has always rejected him. Do you really think that she will be pursued by Musian? Luo Tan still couldn't help asking. Dapen Emperor said coldly, of course I believe in my beloved concubine, but even so, I have to express this attitude, so that no one can get close to my beloved concubine in the future. As for the Green Emperor, don't worry about it, Yao Emperor, I know my limits. Luo Tan waved his hand lightly, indicating that he was tired. If there is nothing else, please go back. Dapen Emperor nodded, okay, there is still something in Yunzhou, so I won't disturb Yao Emperor today. After saying that, he stood up and planned to leave. And just at this moment, Dapen Emperor seemed to vaguely catch a terrifying breath quietly condensing in the hall. The man's footsteps suddenly stopped, and he turned his head subconsciously, just in time to see a green figure quietly condensing in the air in his field of vision. Green Emperor, Dapen Emperor almost blurted out. Almost at that moment, the whole hall seemed to fall into a brief silence. Except that your lifespan is a little longer than that of ordinary cultivators, you really haven't made any progress in other aspects. In this silence, a sound like the sound of heaven rang out in the hall. Almost at that moment, the terrifying spiritual pressure seemed to crush the entire hall. It seemed that the sound of the formation breaking could be heard faintly. The figure of the great Peng Emperor froze slightly, and it felt as if the furnace and cauldron were about to collapse at that moment, and he almost fell to the ground uncontrollably. He opened a pair of huge wings behind him, and his face was angry. Kingdi, I have no grudges against you. Are you planning to declare war on Yunzhou? While he urged his spiritual energy, he used it to barely resist the terrifying pressure. This kind of power was too strong, as if the whole sky was slowly descending, making it difficult to resist. I don't know when it started, but the woman in a green dress sat lazily on the pure world green lotus, overlooking the mighty in the hall, and said lightly, the great Peng Emperor can use his power to suppress others, why can't I? The great Peng Emperor was slightly stunned, and then his face changed slightly. This woman obviously knew that he had attacked Musian today. But how did she know? Wasn't she not in Yuzhou? That was because he attacked my beloved concubine first, otherwise I have no grudge against him. Why would I attack him for no reason? The great Peng Emperor said toughly. This fairy, who was as elegant and noble as the green lotus, stared quietly with her bright green eyes, and said softly, "Is he not clear in your heart whether he is close to your beloved concubine? The princess of Yunzhou is the daughter of the emperor of the great Dao, and her status is so noble. How could she be close to a small cultivator for no reason?" The great Peng emperor naturally knew this in his heart, and he knew that he would suffer a loss in this matter, but at this moment he could not lose face anyway, and could only hold on to resist the terrifying power of this woman. The formation under his feet broke down bit by bit, and the face of the great Peng emperor became more and more ugly. He still underestimated the Yuhua realm. Although the Yuhua realm is another kind of harmony, the power that is not affected by the rules of heaven is simply unfathomable. At this time, the hall seemed to emit a tempting herbal fragrance. Then, Luo Tan took a half step forward and said in an elegant and gentle voice, "This is the palace after all. If you two have a personal grudge, please go outside the palace to fight later." As Luo Tan's voice fell, Yao Meng's previous pressure seemed to be reduced a little. Yao Meng looked at Luo Tan, and then smiled, "In this case, then give the medicine emperor a face." She restrained her spiritual energy, and the suffocating feeling in the hall was quietly restrained. At this moment, the great Peng emperor finally breathed a sigh of relief in secret, and then took a deep look at the most beautiful woman in Zhuzhou in a green skirt, and snorted coldly, "Since the green emperor has something to visit the medicine emperor, I won't disturb you two for now." After saying this, he turned into a golden light and disappeared into the hall. The pure world green lotus behind Yao Meng quietly retracted, and she walked down from mid-air. Luo Tan was looking at Yao Meng with a playful look. "Does the medicine king have anything to say?" Yao Meng asked. Luo Tan shook his head, "Nothing, I just wondered how you could leave Muzian in Yuzhou. It seems that you left some magic on him in advance, so that you can immediately detect it if he is attacked. After all, he died for me once, so I have to leave some tricks when I leave." Yao Meng smiled slightly and added seriously, "But even I don't like to pry into other people's privacy, so I just left a spell to protect him, and never peeped into his life here." Luo Tan smiled lightly and said, "The Green Emperor is really considerate to Mu Xiao." She changed her tone and continued to ask, "You have found the medicinal materials in the southern wilderness, but Yunyanlu in Yunzhou, you put pressure on Daipen Emperor today, how do you plan to find it after this?" "I will go there by myself," Yao Meng said calmly. "Do you know where Yunyanlu grows and how to find it?" Luo Tan asked. "The Yunyanlu is a very special medicinal material. It is as wonderful as it is, ethereal like clouds and smoke, and looks like willow leaves, so it is called Yunyanlu. Although it is not an imperial medicine, it is extremely difficult to obtain. Even a human emperor in the Yuhua realm cannot find it in a short time. After all, Yunzhou is blessed by the formation, and the spiritual consciousness of other powerful people cannot directly scan the entire Yunzhou. If it really doesn't work, let the spiritual consciousness descend to Yunzhou and leave after finding Yunyanliu," Yao Meng said lightly. Luo Tan raised her eyebrows slightly. This fairy is indeed very kind and easy to talk to, but when it comes to Muzian, she seems to be much stronger. In the 9 provinces, no place can allow other powerful people to enter and let the other party's spiritual consciousness spread throughout the state for scanning. This is a great humiliation for that large state, and it may alarm those ancient creatures sealed in the Forbidden Land, and even cause unrest. Does the Medicine Emperor have a better idea?" Yao Meng's smiling voice sounded, looking at the Empress in front of him. Luo Tan opened her red lips and said, "The great Peng Emperor has something to ask of me. If I ask him, he won't refuse." "No." Yao Meng simply shook her head and refused. Refining the immortal medicine is a huge favor. If it is only used to exchange for Yunyan Willow, it would be too wasteful. If Luo Tan is willing, he can even get a lot of unimaginable benefits from Yunzhou. If it is used to exchange for Yunyan Willow, it is indeed too extravagant. In fact, you and I have overlooked someone. If she is willing, she can also take Muzian to find Yunyan Willow," Luo Tan suddenly said. You mean the princess? Yao Meng chuckled, you know what happened between her and me. Anyone can help find Union Willow, but she can't. It is precisely because of this that when Yao Meng learned today that the great Peng Emperor actually suspected that Muzian had an affair with his beloved concubine, he felt that the great Peng Emperor was deliberately making trouble. The princess doesn't like the Green Emperor, so she will naturally hate the Green Emperor's Taoist partner as well. How could the two of them have a private conversation? Luo Tan was silent for a moment. To be honest, although she had intended to match Muzian and the princess to make them have some friendship in the past 2 days, the princess never paid much attention to Muzian. It stands to reason that after knowing the secret of Muzian's natural furnace, she should not be so cold to him, not to mention making friends with him. But the princess was quite cold to him, and even deliberately kept a certain distance. The palace fell into a brief silence, and the two of them remained silent. The Qing Emperor is still as blindly confident as ever. At this time, a woman's gentle and sexy voice suddenly came from the silent hall, "Are you so sure that I will refuse this matter?" The appearance of the woman made Yao Meng and Luo Tan in the hall stunned for a moment. "Princess," Yao Meng narrowed his eyes inadvertently, and for a moment he was a little confused about this woman's way. The princess played with a strand of hair, tilted her head slightly, glanced at the young man behind her, and said with a smile, "I can take him to Yunzhou, or I can take him to get Union Willow. But I have a condition." You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 511. What conditions? Yao Meng was not surprised to hear the princess' request. Rather, if the princess had no request at all and was willing to take Muzian to Yunzhou to find Yunyanliu for no reason, she would have doubts. Luo Tan also looked at her bestie calmly, and for a moment she could not understand the thoughts of the Yunzhou princess. It is rumored that the Yaokai Holy Land will produce some Nirvana silk every few years. The dresses made of Nirvana silk are thin and not transparent, and have the effect of purifying the mind. I wonder if I have the opportunity to see it? The princess' voice was as gentle as usual, and her beautiful eyes stared at Yao Meng from beginning to end, as if she was really interested in Nirvana silk. Is Nirvana silk enough for you? Yao Meng unconsciously lowered her voice, with a little hesitation in her tone. When the princess spoke earlier, she thought that the princess might want to take this opportunity to get some benefits, and Yao Meng was also prepared to give the princess these benefits, but she never thought that the other party just wanted Nirvana silk. Although the output of Nirvana silk is very small, the foundation of Yaokai Holy Land is here, and it has naturally been preserved for so many years. Could it be that the Green Emperor is planning to give me something precious? The princess teased, but her gentle and beautiful eyes glanced at Muzian inadvertently. But the precious things that the Green Emperor really values, I'm afraid you won't be willing to exchange them yourself. This sounds like saying, I want to invest in Muzian, will you let me in? Yao Meng raised her eyebrows slightly, and smiled as she hugged the young man into her arms, saying softly, then we have to see what the precious things the princess wants are. You can fight if you want, but don't burn the fire with me. I just want to experience the warmth of people's hearts at ease. Muzian's face was buried in Yao Meng's arms, smelling the fragrance of the fairy from the green skirt, and silently complained in his heart. The princess glanced at the intimate two people without leaving a trace, and frowned slightly. Although she did not have that kind of feelings for Muzian, the woman Qingdi held Muzian in her arms in front of her at this moment. Could it be that she was provoking her and claiming sovereignty? Just now I was just joking. I only need Nirvana silk that can make a dress. Does Qingdi have any objection to this condition? Asked the princess. Of course I have no objection. It's better to say that the princess can be so generous, and I will remember this favor in my heart. Yao Meng smiled slightly. If ordinary people heard this, they would probably be flattered. Even the powerful people in the Hedeo realm would feel that this deal was worthwhile. After all, it is not so easy to owe favors in the Yahua realm, and this favor will be of great use in the future. But when the princess saw Yao Meng take out a jade box from the ring and handed it to her, she just curled her lips and said lightly, "There is no rush for Nirvana silk. It will not be too late to give it to me after I take him to find Union Willow." It is rumored that the princess of Yunzhou never makes promises easily, but once she makes a promise, she will definitely fulfill her promise, so I believe that the princess will keep her promise and will not break her promise. Yao Meng smiled and handed the exquisite jade box to the princess. "These Nirvana silks are part of it. If the princess does not mind, please accept it first." The princess nodded slowly and took the jade box. She glanced at Yao Meng and then opened the jade box. The fiery red glow burst out from the jade box, and in the glow, a phoenix with fire seemed to emerge vaguely, which was amazing. "Since the deal has been reached, I won't bother you today." After Yao Meng finished speaking, she smiled and nodded at the two of them, and then left the hall with Musian. Luo Tan stared at the two people who walked out of the hall, and unconsciously lowered her voice, "Why are you willing to help him?" When she said this, her eyes were fixed on her best friend. The princess looked indifferent, and her veil covered her face, revealing an unfathomable hazy beauty. "Helping him, isn't it also the same as helping you?" She slightly turned her eyes and looked at the Yuzhou Empress beside her, and smiled. "Why, do you think I would help a stranger who I don't know for no reason, or a little monk?" Luo Tan's red lips opened slightly, as if she wanted to say something, but she fell silent in the end. Although the princess said so much, but Musian is not an ordinary little monk. Even if the princess was born with a connection to the great Dao, it would be impossible for her to ignore the body of the natural furnace. I'm afraid even the princess herself doesn't know that the more she acts as if she doesn't care, the more she actually cares. Following Yao Meng back to the guest room, Musian closed the door. Yao Meng was sitting on the couch with her legs sideways, with her back to the window. Outside the window was a small courtyard. She could vaguely see the scene of flowers blooming, which also made her beautiful face look a bit cold and fairy-like. The thin green gauze dress seemed to be translucent in the light of the morning sun, and her chest was proudly propped up, and the size was just right. "What kind of magic did you cast in my Qinglian ring? I'm afraid you have already noticed that Daipen Emperor just put pressure on me secretly today," Musian whispered. Yao Meng was admiring the scenery outside the window. Hearing this, he slightly side-glanced and looked at him with a smile. "Since I gave you the Qinglian ring that day, the spells I left in the Qinglian ring have not disappeared. After all, you died in front of me once, I don't want to see it again." Musian walked to the soft couch and sat down, suspiciously saying, "Since you know that Daipen Emperor had secretly put pressure on me, then what happened here, you also know it?" His eyes were a little strange, wondering if Sister Kingdi had awakened some strange fetish. After all, there is only a fine line between liking to cheat and liking to be cheated. Maybe, could it be that she has awakened some hobby or something? Yao Meng lazily glanced at Musian and said, "I won't interfere too much with your privacy. I said I didn't peep at you this time, so I won't peep at you naturally. Do you have so little trust in me?" Musian was startled, "But I didn't say you peeped. I said you don't have any strange hobbies or something like that," Musian asked tentatively, his tone full of suspicion. Yao Meng raised her green jade finger and poked his forehead gently, saying angrily, "Except for some women with special hobbies, who would be willing to give their Taoist partner to other women for enjoyment." After a pause, she leaned naturally in Musian's arms, put one hand on his chest, and whispered, "The Qinglian ring is a means to protect your safety. I have never secretly peeped, this is the truth. If I didn't peek, then did I eavesdrop or something like that?" Musian opened his mouth slightly and wanted to ask. but hugging the plump waist of Sister Kingdee and smelling the faint fragrance emanating from her body, it made people a little intoxicated. At this time, Yao Meng broke free from Musian's arms, and then she knelt beside Musian like a docile cat, and gently leaned her white and flawless face like ice crystals against Musian's thighs. It seemed that he could vaguely feel the sweet and warm breath of the woman, and Musian's heartbeat uncontrollably accelerated at that moment. The long hair covered her perky buttocks, and was simply tied up with a jade hairpin. "You won't blame me, will you?" She bent her knees and leaned on Musian's thighs, raised her head, and gazed at Musian gently, with a heart-warming wetness in her eyes. Musian lowered his head and looked at Yao Meng's almost flawless beautiful profile. Finally, he couldn't help but reach out and gently stroke the long hair of Sister Kingdee that was scattered like a waterfall. "I believe you. You told me about the ability of the Qinglian ring before," Musian said while stroking the woman's soft hair. His eyes were always staring at her face. Under Musian's gentle comfort, Yao Meng's expression softened, and she leaned on the boy's legs, enjoying the warmth. "By the way, I will go to the north tomorrow and find one of the medicinal materials for the Liangsu pill that you will need to take later." After a while, Yao Meng suddenly said softly. She raised her head and met Musian's burning eyes. Yao Meng's eyes flashed with a hint of shyness, and she lowered her head slightly, as if she could see a blush on her pretty face. "What's wrong? Why are you staring at others?" Yao Meng asked in a low voice. This shy and gentle voice was so tempting that even an old hand like Musian, who was used to seeing all kinds of shy postures of women, couldn't help but gently lift her snow-white chin with his fingers. "Nothing, get up and sit down to talk." Yao Meng stood up very obediently, and the blue-white dress was stained with dust, and her tender white feet seemed to be stained with some dust on the ground. Musian stared at her, and she also stared at Musian. As the two looked at each other, Yao Meng's face moved closer to him little by little, looking docile and obedient. But hidden deep in her eyes was a playful smile. She hooked her hands around Musian's neck, leaned down slightly, and then said in a sweet voice that seemed to melt people's hearts, "Do you like the feeling of dominating the emperor and making her kneel at your feet obediently? Dear." Boom. This sentence was like a fuse that completely ignited the explosives, exploding in Musian's heart. He lowered his head and stared at Yao Meng's eyes. At this moment, she seemed to have suddenly changed from the well-behaved and docile little girl to the condescending queen, looking down on everyone. Musian finally couldn't hold back, lowered his head and occupied the woman's red lips. The next morning, when Musian woke up, he could no longer see Yao Meng. "It seems that Yao Meng has already gone to the Northland early in the morning. Is she determined to help me comprehend the Taorim and enter the realm of enlightenment this time?" Musian looked at the slightly messy scene in the house, yawned lazily, and then gently stroked the green lotus ring on his finger. "Yesterday, Yao Meng only said that she didn't peek, but didn't say whether she eavesdropped. The human emperor in the Yahua realm has means that can reach the sky and the earth. If he really wants to eavesdrop, it would be too easy. But forget it, anyway, this time it was done with her knowledge. At most, Yao Meng didn't know about the princess." Musian changed his robes, adjusted his manners in front of the bronze mirror, and successfully turned back to the weak and handsome boy in the past. Looking at the bronze mirror in front of him, he seemed to remember the scene of Yao Meng sticking to the bronze mirror yesterday, and couldn't help but sighed, "Hey, how come Sister Kingdee understands me more and more? Where did she learn it from?" He rarely exposed his hobbies in front of Kingdee before, for fear that he would be despised by the other party. However, every once in a while, Yao Meng always managed to grasp one of Musian's hobbies, and even teased him. If Musian is compared to a map for land reclamation, then Yao Meng seems to have almost completed the land reclamation. After leaving the guest room, Musian turned into a rainbow and appeared in Chinexai Palace where the princess lived. The mature and plump princess was admiring flowers in the small courtyard, with her back to Musian, leaving only a beautiful back view. Before Musian could speak, the princess's gentle and generous voice sounded in the courtyard. "You're here so early? Are you so impatient to go to Yunzhou?" She looked sideways at the young man behind her, doubtful at first, and after staring at Musian for a few times, her eyebrows furrowed inadvertently. "That's not entirely true. I'm just curious about something, so I came to ask the princess for advice this morning," Musian said with a smile. "I know what you mean." The princess admired the plump peonies in front of her and spoke softly. "If I had taken you to Yunzhou yesterday without raising any conditions, with the character of Emperor Qing, I am afraid that I would have suspected whether I was plotting something against you. Nirvana silk is indeed rare. Even in Yaokai, I am afraid there are not many left, but it is not enough to make my heart move. I just want to give Kingdi a reason to prevent her from worrying too much." Musian was slightly understanding. The princess's request yesterday was similar to his guess. But apart from that, he also had something unknown. "Why are you willing to take me to Yunzhou? If Emperor Daipen sees it, he will probably misunderstand you and me even more," Musian asked worriedly. The princess said calmly, "You are the one chosen by Luo Tan. Since Luo Tan considers you in every aspect and is even willing to wait until he refines the 9 cauldron void refining pill before enjoying you, then I will naturally help you." She paused, as if she realized what shameless words she had said, and immediately changed the subject in an understatement. "In short, on the one hand, it is because of Luo Tan, and on the other hand, Emperor Daipen came to you twice before. The trouble, although it is directed at you, is caused by me. Take you to find the Union Willow. This can be regarded as an apology on behalf of Yunzhou." When Musian heard this, he couldn't help but smile warmly, looking at the charming figure of the mature wife, without saying anything. "Why are you laughing?" The princess frowned slightly. "It's nothing." Musian shook his head and smiled. If it was to apologize, then Her Royal Highness the Princess had already apologized yesterday, and even went beyond the apology level. The princess was stunned for a moment, and then immediately recalled what Musian did to her yesterday without telling Emperor Daipen. She felt a little more ashamed, bit her lips lightly, and said, "Is it more than just holding hands? Is Mr. Mu just a little boy who has never touched a woman?" Musian smiled and said, "If it's just to apologize, the weight of what happened yesterday in Mu's heart is indeed far beyond that." The corner of the princess's mouth curled up unconsciously, but she quickly said with a straight face, "Since Mr. Mu is talking about this, does it mean that it doesn't matter if I don't take you to Yunzhou?" Musian showed a gentle smile. If Her Royal Highness the Princess took Mu to Yunzhou to apologize, then what happened yesterday is enough in Mu's heart. If she cannot get Yunyanliu because of this, Mu has no regrets. When he finished speaking, his eyes looked tenderly into the princess's eyes. A trace of panic flashed in the princess' eyes, and soon after, she realized her gaffe. She took a shallow breath, exhaled it slowly, and said calmly, "Don't worry, I won't go back on my promise. Since I agreed, I will definitely take you to Yunzhou." Musian raised his hands and bowed respectfully, then "Thank you, Your Highness, Princess. By the way, I wonder what you plan to do with the Nirvana silk you got yesterday." Musian suddenly asked an irrelevant topic. A trace of doubt flashed in the princess's eyes. Yesterday, she just wanted to find an excuse to prevent Kingdi from suspecting some messy things, but she had not yet thought about the specific use of Nirvana silk. Since Her Royal Highness the Princess hasn't figured out the correct use of Nirvana silk yet, why not let Mu Mao give you an idea? Muji settled down, put on a mysterious smile, and said, "It is a usage that can make women's charm soar." So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 512. A way to increase a woman's charm. The princess' curiosity was successfully aroused by Musian. She looked at him suspiciously and asked, "What method?" Since Her Royal Highness the Princess is a close friend with His Majesty Luo Tan, she must have been to Yuzhou in the past. I think she has seen silk stockings and the like in Yuzhou, Musian asked. Of course I've seen it before, but what does this have to do with what you just said? As soon as the princess said this, she noticed Musian's eyes and seemed to immediately understand the meaning of his words. There was a hint of sullenness in her eyes. Mr. Mu, what is the connection between stockings and female charm you mentioned? Is this the case? Are you teasing me? Musian shook his head and said, Nirvana silk is different from other silks. The stockings made from it are not only silky and smooth, but also bright in color and light in texture. It is a good material. Especially after it is made into stockings, the touch between them and the skin is even more wonderful. The more the princess listened, the more she felt that something was not right. Logically speaking, since they were stockings, it should mean that Musian had not been in contact with them. So how did he know so clearly? Although I have no interest in what you said about improving your charm, if the Nirvana silk is left here, it won't be of much use to me. At most, it will be made into a dress. She wanted to think about it, but the princess still readily accepted Musian's proposal. Okay, since you said you have other ways to use Nirvana silk, how about I leave this matter to you? After saying that, she took out a finely crafted jade box from the ring and handed it to Musian. Leave everything to me, Musian said with a smile. The princess glanced at Musian and continued, come with me to Yunzhou on this trip. Remember not to leave me too far rashly, otherwise I may not be able to protect you. She paused, glanced meaningfully at the green lotus ring on Musian's hand, and smiled, but with the blessing technique left by the Qing emperor on you, it's not a big problem after all. Musian took the jade box and immediately said cautiously, no matter what, I still need more care from you when I go to Yunzhou. Mu's ability is limited, so he can only find a way to repay Her Royal Highness the Princess in this regard. Looking at the respectful expression on the young man's face, the princess' eyes softened a bit and said, you and King Di are Taoist couples, so you don't have to use honorifics to me in everything. Musian was stunned for a moment, then smiled, then it's better to be respectful than to obey. After chatting with the princess for a while, Musian said goodbye to the princess, and then immediately found the palace tailor in the palace and asked him to make a pair of white silk from Nirvana silk according to the requirements. In addition, there were a large number of remaining Nirvana silk is made into silver white dresses. 2 days later, Musian came to the main hall of the palace and handed the finished clothes to the princess. When she opened the exquisite wooden box, the princess's beautiful eyes couldn't help but light up slightly. The design of this dress is indeed very beautiful, and the stockings look equally good, which is beyond her expectation. Luo Tan played with a white seed in her hand, and a breeze caused her white dress to fly back, vaguely revealing a touch of white between her snow-white boots and her thighs. Her eyes were equally surprised and she said to herself, I never thought that the stockings made by Nirvana silk would be so effective. If I had known this, I would have asked King Di for a share. The thin and opaque white silk has an excellent texture just by touching it, and even exudes a faint holy radiance. If worn on the legs, it can indeed increase one's own charm. With a bit of surprise in her eyes, the princess accepted Musian's gift, nodded and said, you are really thoughtful. It's not just intentional. I've known him for so long, and I've never seen him be so attentive. Luo Tan snorted, with a hint of resentment in his tone. She looked straight at Musian with her beautiful eyes, and winked at him playfully across a long table, as if to say, how are you going to appease your sister? If your majesty needs it, when I return to Dongzhou this time, I will ask the saint of Yaokai for some and ask someone to make stockings and give them to you, Musian said sincerely. Forget it, I don't want it sincerely. Luo Tan complained deliberately, dropped a white piece, and immediately glanced at the princess opposite. The princess was twisting a sunspot in her hand, her brows were relaxed, and she had a faint smile on her face. She seemed to be in a good mood. Seeing that the woman was thinking about her next move, Luo Tan glanced at the young man standing aside, then smiled lightly and said, "You should also sit down, it's so tiring to stand like this." Musian sat down next to Luo Tan, and then paused for a moment on the Empress Qingqing's elegant profile. As if aware of Musian's gaze, Luo Tan turned his head slightly and looked at him with a smile, as if to say, "What are you looking at?" Musian immediately gave her an apologetic look. To be honest, he never thought of preparing silk stockings for Luo Tan before. This time, he just took advantage of the situation, because the princess asked for Nirvana silk, and he only came up with the idea at the last minute. Luo Tan didn't pay attention to Musian's gaze. She held her cheek in one hand and gently pressed her plump and straight breasts to rest on the table, waiting for the princess to make her move. Before Musian could think about Luo Tan's thoughts at the moment, he suddenly felt a slender hand as gentle as jade gently placed on the back of his hand, and then moved his hand away. Musian felt strange in his heart, secretly glanced at Luo Tan, and said in a voice transmission, "Your Majesty, you." Before he finished speaking, his body suddenly stiffened slightly, and he subconsciously looked down at Luo Tan's clever little hand. The alchemy empress of Yuzhou blinked at Musian, then glanced at the princess opposite inadvertently, opened her red lips slightly, blocking the possibility of the princess eavesdropping, and said in a voice transmission, "Don't talk, you don't want the princess to know that you are being bullied, right?" After nearly half an hour, the game between the two was over. Musian had not come back to his senses until the end. He stood up absent-mindedly and looked at Luo Tan, who was asking someone to clean up the chessboard strangely. He now had reason to suspect that Luo Tan might really play some games with him during the court session one day. "Did you hear me?" At this time, a woman's gentle and pleasant voice came from the side, which also brought Musian back to reality and saw the princess who stood beside him at some point. "Please speak, Princess." Musian showed his usual warm smile. "Thank you for the dress and stockings you gave me this time. As you said, this dress is really beautiful." The princess lowered her eyes slightly and whispered, "This is the first time I have received something from a man." "Hasn't the great Pen Emperor ever given you a gift in the past?" Musian was a little surprised. "Most of the things he gave were valuable antiques or natural treasures," the princess said softly. But he couldn't help but sigh in his heart. Even though he had been with her for such a long time, the great Pen Emperor didn't know her as well as the young monk he just met outside. As a woman, who would like any precious antiques, even if it is worth hundreds of thousands of spirit stones? As a great man in the Hedeo realm, the treasures of heaven and earth have long been useless to her. What use would those treasures of heaven and earth have even if they were given to her? But clothes, stockings, etc. are real things that can make a woman more attractive. Ah! Hearing this, Musian couldn't help but sigh. "I think Senior de Penguang is busy with all kinds of things, and I don't think he has much time to think about these insignificant things like Mew." The princess' eyes flashed, but she didn't say anything else. After a while, she said, "You go back and prepare first. I will take you to Yunzhou today to find Union Willow as soon as possible." Musian said no more, just bowed to the princess and left the main hall. As the saying goes, the more you talk, the more mistakes you make. You must know when to stop in everything. This is the same principle whether it is used in pursuing women or in designing traps. In Zhuzhou, there has been a legend since ancient times. Yunzhou is the place closest to the sky. And there is another rumor among some cultivators: in Yunzhou, you can touch the clouds as long as you stretch out your hand, and therefore, this place is called Yunzhou. And the sky referred to here is the way of heaven. If it were in the past, Musian would never believe such a rumor. However, when the princess tore open the space crack and brought Musian to the border of Yunzhou, his previous doubts were completely shattered. What came into view was a surging sea of clouds. The light of the setting sun dyed the sea of clouds into a dazzling and charming golden color, and Musian touched the clouds just by stretching out his hand. "Isn't it beautiful?" The princess walked to Musian's side in her silver-white embroidered shoes and looked up at the endless sea of clouds. This is the end of Yunzhou. Beyond is the world of nothingness. People generally call that world Shangtian. Musian's eyes moved slightly, and he said, Shangtian? Is it the final destination for collecting luck on this Sabbath? The princess nodded slightly, stretched out her hands, gently held up a piece of misty cloud, blew a breath, followed the dispersing cloud with her eyes, and said softly, every time I finish a troublesome government affairs, I will come here alone to see the end of Yunzhou. So I am the second one, Musian asked flattered. The princess nodded gently, I have thought about coming here with Luotan, but her identity is special and she can't come here with me. Musian was silent. The two are the rulers of the two states respectively. It is indeed inappropriate to bring Luotan to such a place. Today, the princess has changed into the silver white dress. The thin white silk wrapped around her slender and plump legs. The strong wind blew the dress tightly against her chest, and it was completely unable to cover up her sexy figure. The light of the setting sun shone down, dyeing her fair and beautiful face with a touch of warm luster. Why did you bring me here? Musian suddenly asked. The princess raised her hand and turned around, her dress fluttered, and her skirt quietly bloomed, bright and beautiful. It's a reward for you giving me this dress. The princess showed a charming smile. After I go back today, I will first explore the location of Yunyanliu, and then take you there, she continued. Musian nodded slightly, everything is up to Her Royal Highness the Princess. He looked up and looked into the distance. As far as his eyes could see, the clouds and smoke under the morning glow surged. Such a magnificent scene, even Musian was fascinated. No wonder people used to say that Yunzhou was the place closest to heaven. It turns out that God is so close to Yunzhou, Musian exclaimed. The princess looked up and looked into the distance, and suddenly whispered, in fact, I don't think that the heaven that Yunzhou is close to refers to the heavenly Dao. Musian's mind moved slightly, and asked, why does your highness princess think so? Don't most of the cultivators in Yunzhou believe in the heavenly Dao? It is true that Yunzhou believes in the heavenly Dao, but it is not necessarily true that Yunzhou is closest to the heavenly Dao, otherwise the heavenly Dao would not have eroded Yunzhou step by step over the years. The princess stared into Musian's eyes and whispered, I have always felt that the heaven that Yunzhou is close to does not refer to the heavenly Dao, but the heavenly court. This sentence almost stunned Musian, and he came back to his senses after a long time, and said, what does your highness princess mean by this? When the road to becoming an immortal appeared in the past, I felt the spiritual energy of the heavenly court here. The princess revealed a secret that had been hidden for a long time, staring at Musian's eyes. So the princess felt the spiritual energy of the heaven in my body at that time, because she had captured the same spiritual energy here. Musian was a little surprised. It stands to reason that the heaven should have no connection with Zhu, but the princess had felt the spiritual energy of the heaven in Yunzhou. Is there any connection between Yunzhou and the heaven? The princess didn't say anything, but just stared at Musian. From the moment she mentioned the matter of the heaven, the princess had been staring at Musian, trying to figure out something through his expression. And when she saw the confused look in Musian's eyes, the princess couldn't help but feel a little more lost in her heart. She always thought that Musian should have some relationship with the heaven, so she brought him here first to see how he would react. But it seems that he doesn't know about the heaven. Wait. At this time, a thought flashed through the princess' mind. She suddenly realized something that she had subconsciously ignored all along. Musian is a natural furnace, and the spiritual energy in the natural furnace comes from the spiritual energy of the heaven. So the question is, whenever the spiritual energy of the heaven in Musian's natural furnace disappears, how does it make up for it again? He definitely knows something. The princess stared at Musian with a flickering light in her eyes. Just as the princess was about to ask, a gust of wind suddenly blew, and then the sunset seemed to be covered by the huge kunpeng, and the shadow shrouded it. The appearance of this figure also broke the beautiful atmosphere of the two just now. The princess frowned slightly and said, "Dapen Emperor? What are you doing here?" As the princess spoke, the Kunpeng turned into a human figure, standing above the sea of clouds, looking down at Musian with sharp eyes. "Why did you come to Yunzhou?" "I brought him here," the princess answered for Musian. Dapen Emperor frowned. "Why?" "I made a deal with King Di. I found Union Willow for her, and she exchanged it for Nirvana silk." The princess' tone was as gentle as usual, but her spiritual consciousness was secretly protecting Musian. "Union Willow?" Dapen Emperor raised his eyebrows slightly, obviously knowing the effect of this natural treasure, and said, "King Di has already ascended to heaven and still wants Union Willow for a suspicious purpose. Nirvana silk in Yaokai Holy Land is indeed precious and rare, but you are the princess, there is no need to take him to find Union Willow for Nirvana silk." The princess was obviously displeased, and said lightly, "As long as I like it, it's enough. The dress made of Nirvana silk is unparalleled. To me, its value is no less than Union Willow." Dapen Emperor heard this and realized that his beloved concubine had changed into a silver-white dress that was different from the past. The plump legs under the dress were wrapped in a pair of white silk that seemed to reveal delicate skin, and she was wearing a pair of silver-white embroidered shoes, which were extremely beautiful in the afterglow of the sunset. And this time, the princess used the method of voice transmission, and said quietly, "This is an opportunity to make peace with the Green Emperor. If I were you, I would treat Musian well instead of being hostile to him all the time. It is not good for Yunzhou to be enemies with the Yaokai Holy Land and the Lianji section." The Dapen Emperor's eyes flickered, and the hostility towards Musian in his heart slowly subsided a little, and a thoughtful look appeared on his face. After all, he was one of the rulers of Yunzhou, so he naturally understood the truth of what the princess said. Before, he was hostile to Musian because he saw his beloved concubine walking with a little cultivator, and at that time he didn't know Musian's identity at all, so he naturally looked down on a little cultivator who had just entered the return to void stage. Later, after knowing it, he also held an arrogant attitude because he underestimated Musian's position in the heart of the Green Emperor. The action of the Green Emperor this time has proved how much the Green Emperor values the little man beside her. Moreover, the Green Emperor seems to have a good relationship with his beloved concubine. He actually gave so much Nirvana silk in the transaction with his beloved concubine, and also specially made such beautiful dresses and stockings for his beloved concubine. This is enough to prove that the Green Emperor is not hostile to Yunzhou. In this case, it seems not bad to let this matter go. Thinking of this, the great Peng Emperor changed his previous arrogance and confrontation, and showed a hearty smile on his face. There were some small misunderstandings with Musian before. Since it has been cleared up today, let's just let it go. Today, I will have someone welcome you and my beloved concubine." The princess looked gentle and calm, and said, "In this case, let's go back to the palace first." When she said this, her eyes stayed on Musian for a long time with great concern. Where did Musian's heavenly aura come from? "Is there anything else, Your Royal Highness?" Musian asked hesitantly. The princess smiled, "It's okay. Now is not the time to chat, so we can only wait until the banquet is over before trying to contact him." That night, Emperor Dapen held a grand banquet and invited all the ministers from Yunzhou to greet Musian and his wife. Rao was the princess who had secretly persuaded Emperor Dapen before. She was speechless for a moment at the change in attitude of the Lord of Yunzhou. She said through a message, "I just told you not to offend him again, but you can't do it. Such a warm treat." Emperor Dapen shook his head and said, "This is not only a banquet to entertain Musian, but also a banquet that has not been held in Yunzhou for a long time, so it is treated as a reward for the ministers." The princess frowned and said through a message, "But you just targeted Musian before." "I targeted him before because there was some misunderstanding between me and him. Since I plan to take this opportunity to bury the hatchet this time, a cocktail party is the best way. Emperor Dapen replied calmly, raised his glass in the direction of Musian, and then drank it all in one gulp. Musian took a sip of his drink and said nothing. Despite being so enthusiastic, Musian knew clearly that the Lord of Yunzhou still maintained his arrogance and felt that the previous pressure on him was natural. Because in Emperor Dapen's heart, Musian was just a young monk, and it was already a great honor for the majestic Lord of Yunzhou to lower his body and entertain the young monk. After the princess was silent for a while, she silently held up the wine glass and signaled to the officials in the audience. All the officials at the banquet raised their glasses one after another. After a while, the dancer walked into the hall with gentle steps and began to perform. The dance performance was quite beautiful and made the dinner even more lively. But when the princess thought about her previous guess, she became a little absent-minded. She held the wine glass and glanced at Musian sitting in the audience without leaving any trace. "Everyone, drink first, I'll go out and get some fresh air." When the banquet was in full swing, the princess smiled brightly, then made an excuse, quietly stood up, and walked out of the banquet hall. Musian was admiring the graceful dancing of the dancers in the hall. At this moment, he suddenly saw a note appear on his desk. Musian calmly glanced at the Dapen Emperor on the main seat. The Lord of Yunzhou was enjoying the performance of the dancers while drinking and chatting with the ministers. He seemed to be a little tipsy. As long as you don't deliberately dispel the smell of alcohol, even a powerful Hedao master will still get drunk after drinking the wine in Yunzhou. Musian slowly opened the note, and Juanli's handwriting came into view. "Mr. Mu, please move to the side hall and explain."